Hello everyone, welcome to PW English YouTube channel. I'm Shalini Somashekar, your botany teacher. I welcome you to this lecture in the UMEED NEET English batch. In today's class, we are going to start with the ecology unit. The first chapter being organisms and populations, a very important chapter, interesting chapter. And before we start off with the concepts, I'm going to take you through how many questions have appeared in the NEET exam over the last few years from this chapter. So you can see there's a range between 1 and 5. There have been times where just one question has been asked, and there have been times where as many as 5 questions have been asked from this chapter. But most years it's like 2 or 3 questions. So even in the upcoming NEET 2025 exam, you can expect like 2 to 3 questions coming from this chapter. And talking about the syllabus, should you refer the old NCERT textbook or new NCERT textbook for this chapter? I would recommend you to refer the old NCERT textbook for this chapter. Now, before many of you all jump into the comments and tell me why is she teaching the deleted syllabus, this is not even there for NEET exam, why are you wasting my time and all of that, let me tell you, here is a snip of the latest NEET syllabus that NTA has released for NEET 2025. And you can clearly see the first part of the chapter, which is deleted in the rationalized syllabus, is still there here. And this you can find only in the new NCERT. I'm sorry, in the old NCERT. Okay, so if you have to cover this, then you have to refer the old NCERT textbook. Organism and environment is there. Then you have populations, population interactions, how population growth happens and all of that. Now, the name of the chapter itself is Organisms and Populations. So, of course, we're going to talk about organisms and populations. More about it, you will understand as we move on. Now, what do you already know about ecology? Ecology in general language, general English, is environmental science. Ecology is a branch of biology similar to your histology, anatomy, morphology, physiology, cytology. Just like that, even ecology is a branch of biology. What do we study in ecology? We study about the interactions that take place between living organisms and the interactions that take place between living organisms and its surrounding physical environment. For example, consider ourselves. If we have to survive, we need to eat food. Where do we get our food from? From other organisms. You're a vegetarian, you're probably eating a plant, which is another living organism. If you're a non-vegetarian, you're probably eating plant-based food as well as meat, which are again other organisms. So we depend on other organisms, we interact with other organisms in the environment, and also we interact with our physical environment, right? If we have to survive, we also need oxygen to be taken into our body. We inhale oxygen from our surrounding atmosphere. Oxygen is present in the air around us, which is not a living thing. It is an abiotic component. So we constantly interact with living organisms as well as non-living abiotic components. That interaction is what we're going to learn about in ecology. Also, if you consider plants, plants interact with us. Whatever carbon dioxide we have exhaled, they pick it up and then they fix it into glucose. They perform photosynthesis. They interact with microbes present in the soil. They also interact with other organisms. And also, they interact with the surrounding physical environment. They are dependent on sun for energy. They are dependent on soil for nutrients. They require water for photosynthesis. So, all of these interactions where living organisms are interacting with other living organisms belonging to the same species, different species, doesn't matter. Interaction between living and living organisms and other living organisms, and also between living organisms and its surrounding abiotic environment or physical environment. That is what we're going to learn about in ecology. All right. Now let's understand what are the different things that we will study under ecology, or what are the things that are included under ecology. For that, let's begin by understanding the various levels of organization we have in biology. Okay, so levels of biological organization. The smallest level that you could organize it is macromolecules. Macromolecules are our carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids like RNA, DNA, lipids that are found exclusively in living organisms. These different types of macromolecules come together and form cells. For example, let's consider plants like parenchyma, collenchyma. These are tissues that are composed of cells. So these cells come together to form tissues like parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma, xylem, phloem and all of that. These tissues come together to form organs inside a plant, like root, stem and leaves. These are considered organs in plants, and in some animals you will have organ systems. You don't find organ systems everywhere. In some higher animals you find organ systems, but after organs in plants you have like an individual complete plant that has root, stem, leaves and all of that. Then comes our population level. What is a population? Population is a group of individuals belonging to the same species occupying a particular well-defined geographical area. That is what a population is. Now, macromolecules are present in all plants. Different types of cells are present in a plant. These cells will form different types of tissues like parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma, xylem, phloem and all of that. These tissues come together in organs like root, stem and leaves. Different organs of a plant come together, root, stem, leaves, flower, fruit, all of that come together to form an individual organism, an individual rose plant. Let's consider a rose plant. Now, a population is a group of rose plants that are occupying a particular area at a particular time. When we talk about a population, it will always have one species of organism. More than one individual will be present and it's belonging to the same species occupying a particular area at a particular time. That is a population. What is a community? Community is our next level. Community is many different populations. Like there is in an area a population of rose plants, a population of mango trees, a population of tulsi plants and a population of butterflies. So many different populations belonging to different species is what a community is. Next comes the ecosystem. In ecosystem, we bring in the abiotic component. So far, I've just been talking about biotic component and I've told you that when we're learning ecology, we also bring in the abiotic component, right? Or the non-living physical environment. So here, in ecosystem, we will learn about the interactions between living organisms and the abiotic environment, which includes the soil, water, sunlight, air around us, all of that. What is a biome? Biome is the next level. Biomes are basically huge, large geographical areas, very large ecosystems, where in that ecosystem you have its own specific set of climatic conditions, specific types of plants and animals found. Okay, for example, desert is a biome. Desert is a huge geographical area. You have a fixed set of climatic conditions which are known by very little rainfall. There's water scarcity, not much water present in the soil, and temperature is too hot during the day, it's too cold at night. Summers are there is scorching heat during summer. These are some climatic conditions that you can think of the moment I mentioned desert. Likewise, flora and fauna are also characteristic for desert. The moment I tell you desert, you will immediately think about plants like tumbleweeds and cacti and palm trees and all of that. Animals, probably kangaroo rats and some certain types of reptiles, camels. These are the things that your mind will immediately associate deserts with. So biome is also an ecosystem, but it's a huge ecosystem with a huge geographical area having its own characteristic set of climatic conditions, flora and fauna as well. Next, you have biosphere. Biosphere is the entire, all of the biomes in the whole world put together. Okay, so here you can see individual organism, one frog, a population, many frogs belonging to the same species occupying a particular area. A community includes many different populations. Here you have frogs, you have a plant and you have like an earthworm. 3 different species, 3 different populations are present. Ecosystem, many different populations of different species, and you have the abiotic water, soil, air, sunlight and all of that. Biome is huge geographical areas like the desert, tundra, tropical rainforests and so on. And then biosphere is the entire world. Okay, so in ecology, what are we going to learn? We are going to learn from the organism level to the biome level. If you're learning about macromolecules, it is called biochemistry. If you're learning about cells, you call it cytology. If you're learning about tissues, you call it histology. If you're learning about organs, organ systems, how they function, it is physiology, right? So In ecology, which is a branch of biology, we learn about organisms, its interaction with the environment, what are populations, what is an ecosystem, what are biomes, why are they so different from each other, all of those things. All right? Now, yeah. So first, in the first part of this chapter, we learn about organisms, and in the second part of the chapter, we will learn about populations and its importance and its interactions, all of those things, okay? This part is deleted in your rationalized textbook. You don't find this in the new NCERT. You must learn this from the old NCERT textbook itself. I told you that we are learning ecology right now. Organisms and populations is a unit in ecology. Over here in ecology, when we're learning about organisms, we're not talking about how is my morphological feature, how are genes passed on from one generation to another. That's not our concern here. When we're learning about organism in ecology, we are interested primarily in physiological ecology. We are talking about how we are interacting with other organisms and our physical environment. So, I am present in a particular environment right now. How am I adapted to that environment? Physiologically, how am I responding to my surrounding environment? That is what we're going to learn about in organisms part, okay? So, ecology at the organism level is basically physiological ecology. Okay, how does your body respond to your surrounding environment? You know that in Earth, on our planet, there are varied climatic conditions. In different parts of the world, you find the climatic conditions vary. Over there, no matter where organisms are growing, ultimately, we all have a biological purpose. We might have different purposes for our own lives, like the purpose of a dog's life in the dog's mind is to survive, probably fetch food. You all want to be doctors. I want to be like a decent teacher. So we all have purposes set for our lives. But ultimately, all living organisms have one biological purpose, which is to continue our generations. Even after we are gone, we have to make sure that our species continues. All right. So what do? Regardless of how the environment around us changes, we try and adapt to it as much as we can so that we can survive well. And if we survive well, of course, we can possibly reproduce and ensure the continuation of our species. So when we're talking about organism at the ecological level, it's firstly, primarily, we are focusing on physiological ecology, where we are learning about how our body adapts to our changing environment. We change according to the environment around us to make sure that we survive. And if we survive, of course, there will be a chance for reproduction, right? So, different organisms, how are different organisms adapted to their environments in terms of survival and reproduction? All right, now let's talk about biomes. There are many different types of biomes. Here are 3 examples. Right here, I have a desert. Over here, there is what looks like a tropical rainforest. And here is a tundra biome that is found usually towards the poles, in the polar regions where the temperature is like super low. The moment I name these biomes, of course, a picture will strike in your minds. I already explained to you what biomes mean. They are huge geographical areas with characteristic climatic conditions, characteristic flora and fauna. Okay, so these are examples for biomes. Why are so many different types of biomes present on our planet? What is the need for it? Why are they even there? Why is there variety over there? Why can't the entire land mass be uniform? Why can't the entire land mass on Earth be like a tropical rainforest? Why can't it entirely be like a, let's say, temperate forest? Why is it not entirely a desert? What causes different parts of the world to have different types of biomes? The answer is, there are so many differences in different parts of a planet, primarily because of variations that happen yearly, annual variations that are happening Annual variations means yearly variations that are happening with respect to temperature and with respect to precipitation. You know, in all of these three biomes, temperature, mean temperature over the year annually varies, right? The temperature that you find in desert is not the same as tundra. There is a huge difference, stark contrast here. In tropical rainforest, it's pretty much a stable kind of temperature. That varies. How much precipitation happens also varies. Precipitation could be in terms of rainfall or in terms of snowfall. In desert, rainfall is very, very minimal. In tropical rainforest and tundra biomes, precipitation does occur. In tropical rainforest, rainfall happens. That's why it's called a rainforest. And then in tundra biome, you find snowfall. So precipitation is variable from one biome to another. Ultimately, what is the reason for temperature variation that happens annually and that happens seasonally? That is because of the tilt in the Earth's tilt in the axis of the Earth that rotates around around the sun. Okay, so let's assume this is the sun, and let's assume this is not the Earth. Of course, Earth is a sphere, but over here, let's assume this is the Earth and this is the imaginary axis that passes through the center of the Earth. I'm sure everybody knows that Earth rotates on its own axis and it also simultaneously revolves around the sun, right? This axis of the Earth is not perpendicular like this. It's not straight. It is tilted slightly. It's tilted to, I think, 23.5 degrees or something. 23.5 or 23.4, one of those. It's tilted like this, okay? So I want you to notice how right now the top portion of the pen is closer to the sun while the bottom portion is slightly away from the sun. As it rotates and revolves, it's not like the top portion will always be closer to the sun. Okay, so when it revolves around the sun, when it comes to this side, I want you to notice how the bottom portion is now closer to the sun and the top portion is away from the sun. Depending upon which hemisphere of our Earth is closer to the sun, we experience different seasons. If the top northern hemisphere is closer to the sun as right now, then it will be summer in the northern hemisphere, winter in the southern hemisphere. As it moves, probably after half a year, you can see that it will be winter in the northern hemisphere and summer in the southern hemisphere. So depending upon the rotation or revolution of the Earth around the sun, and also because of the tilt of its axis, different parts of the world receive different amounts of sunlight, different amounts of varied temperature, which gives rise to seasonal variations on our planet. Okay, so across different seasons, you can see there is a variation in duration as well as intensity. Now, the moment you think about sun and Earth rotating around the sun, one very, very obvious effect that you can notice is with respect to how the light changes. Okay, during the day it's bright, and towards evening, late evening and night it becomes darker and darker, and at night it's like there is no sun, it's very dark. You must understand that from sun we get light, and sun is also source of heat for our planet, right? Think about how the temperature varies throughout the day. It's not constant. Throughout the day, the temperature also varies. If you look at the weather app on your phone, you will notice how throughout the day it's not like 25, 26 degrees Celsius. Very early in the morning, it's pretty chill. It's probably 18, 19 degrees Celsius here in Bangalore. It differs in different parts of the world. Where you live, it could be different. And then towards midday, around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, it hits peak. Sometimes at 2, 3 o'clock, it hits like a peak. And then it falls again. And towards evening, again, it is low. Temperature goes down, and towards overnight, it again goes down. So there is a variation in temperature also that happens every day, and also across different seasons. If you've looked at your newspaper, there is a maximum and minimum temperature that they give, that they used to give, I'm not sure, because we used to read it in our school assembly and that's how I remember. You will notice how during different seasons, the maximum minimum also varies. Alright, that is about the temperature variation. Yeah, Because the duration and intensity of temperature varies like this, there are different seasons that we experience. Now, precipitation, I've already told you, it's in terms of rainfall and snowfall. That also varies across different parts of the world. Accordingly, many different biomes will form. Okay? Now let's take a look at this important graph that is given in the NCERT textbook. In this graph, you can see on the x-axis there is mean annual precipitation expressed in centimeters, and on the y-axis you have mean annual temperature expressed in terms of degree Celsius. Okay, so you can see how the temperature and precipitation varies and what is the range of mean annual temperature and precipitation for different biomes. There are a total of 6 biomes mentioned here. It's color coded and all of the details are mentioned right here. Over here, it's important for us to know what are the characteristic temperature and precipitation for the different biomes. Let's see. Let's look at this table. I've taken data from that graph and added the numbers over here. So in a desert, we know that deserts, there is very little rainfall and the temperature is pretty high. So the mean temperature is 5 degrees to 23 degrees Celsius and the mean precipitation is very low, it's just about 45 to 55 centimeters. In a grassland, the precipitation is slightly better. It's about 50 to 120 centimeters. While the temperature variation is huge, it could be as low as 0 degrees Celsius and as high as 27 degrees Celsius. Talking about the tundra region, which is known for its very cold climate and snow. Over here, the temperature ranges between -12 to 0 degrees Celsius and the precipitation is mostly in terms of snowfall. So here it is 45 to 125 centimeters. In the temperate forest, which is also towards the temperate regions, of course, away from the equator, the temperature will usually be less. It ranges between 9 to 22 degrees Celsius and the precipitation is in terms of rain as well as snow. Over here you can see 70 to 210 centimeters of precipitation. Coniferous forests, even less temperature, 0 to 13 degrees Celsius. Precipitation 70 to 250 centimeters. Tropical rainforest, not much of a variation in temperature. It lies between 18 to 13 degrees Celsius and precipitation, here you can expect the highest amount of precipitation, about 170 to 380 centimeters. All right. Yeah. So over here it's important for you to remember where the precipitation is least, desert, where is it highest, tropical forest, where is the temperature least, it is in the tundra region. So these are some details that you should keep in mind. Okay. Now we'll talk about habitats. What are habitats? Within a biome, there will be local as well as regional variations. For example, if you consider like a desert, in the entire desert, the environment will not be the same. There could be some regions in the desert where water availability is more compared to other regions. It's not like, of course, in a desert, it is characterized by low water availability. There is water scarcity there. But I'm sure you know that in deserts, you do find water bodies called oases. So, of course, there are regions within the desert biome where water is present. So, in whatever regions water is present, the kind of plants and animals that you find here will be different. Wherever oasis is present, water is present, you can probably find palm trees and some other types of plants there. Within this water body, you can find some animals thriving. There also will be regions within the same desert biome where water availability is there, but it's not as much as an oasis. Over here, you can find plants like cacti growing, kangaroo rats and reptiles surviving. There could be areas or regions in the desert where water is almost absent. In such cases, you will find a different set of plants and animals. You probably find tumbleweeds there. Okay. So within a biome, there will be regional as well as local variations. That leads to the formation of a wide variety of habitats. Within each biome, you have wide variety of habitats. Okay. So habitats is basically the address of an organism. Where does an organism live? That is its habitat. Okay. Now, Of course, wherever conditions are favorable, life will exist. Wherever conditions are moderate, not too drastic, living organisms will exist. But we can see on our planet that even in conditions where the habitat has very harsh climatic conditions, even there living organisms are known to survive. Some examples are listed in your NCERT textbook. Scorching Rajasthan desert. Over there the temperature is very high, water availability is very low. Even in such harsh conditions, we know that plants and animals survive. Rain-soaked Meghalaya forest, which could be a problem because if there is rainfall happening continuously, and it's not like the normal rainfall that we see in most parts of the world. In Meghalaya, you see like torrential rains, like crazy rains with a lot of winds. In such cases where rainfall is also high and it's also windy, soil erosion could be a problem. Plants might get detached, they might not hold on very firmly to the soil. And even in such harsh habitats, we know that living organisms do adapt and exist. Open deep ocean trenches. Trenches are like these depressions that you find in the seabed, like in oceans. At the bottom, the ocean floor is there for several kilometers also it can go. It'll be those depressions that you find there. They are called trenches. Over there, the water pressure will be crazy high. Even in such conditions, organisms are known to survive. Torrential streams where there is flowing water at a very, very fast rate. The velocity of water will be very, very high. So even in such places, organisms grow. Polar regions, there's a lot of ice, water availability is still limited. Though there is ice, plants cannot utilize it. It's also like a desert. It's like a frozen desert. Water is there everywhere, but in the form of ice, which plants cannot utilize. So that is an issue. High mountain tops where the air pressure is very low. As a result, partial pressure of oxygen will be low and animals might find it difficult to breathe. But still, we adapt and survive there. Stinking compost pits where oxygen availability could be a problem. Our intestine. In all of these places, despite the conditions being not so optimum, organisms still manage to survive. Okay, so even in such unfavorable habitats, organisms still can be found. Now, what is a characteristic of habitat? I mean, what is a habitat characterized by? It's characterized by its biotic as well as abiotic components. What are the abiotic components? There are four very important abiotic components, which is temperature, water, light, and soil. Biotic components, you have pathogens, parasites, predators, competitors. More about this we will learn under populations part. Right now, we will focus on the abiotic components. Very, very important: temperature, water, light, and soil. Okay. Now, there's an important term that you need to learn, which is called niche. Now, what is a niche? Niche is a general English word. Niche is finding like a comfortable or a suitable position. For example, we say she's found her niche in the creative industry, or he has found his niche in business, or whatever. It means finding like a comfortable position, something like that. What is niche with respect to ecology? Now, if you think about living organisms, we all have a functional role that we play in the ecosystem. Also, there is a range of conditions that we can tolerate. Okay, like we can tolerate one range of temperature. Like I can tolerate something between 10 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius. Different organisms have different ranges of environmental conditions that it can tolerate. I'm giving you the example of temperature, but it could be salinity in case of aquatic organisms. It could be pH in case of plant, soil pH. It could be, pressure of air, whatever, or pressure of water for aquatic animals. So there is a fixed range of environmental conditions that each individual organism can tolerate. Also, what matters is the resources that we utilize from our environment. Like we utilize different resources, we utilize food from nature, right? And also we take oxygen from nature. So we utilize resources that are present in nature. What is the diversity of resources that we are utilizing from nature? That is an important point. All of this together is our niche. What are the different things? Firstly, what is the range of conditions that an organism can tolerate? Secondly, what is the diversity it is showing in, utilizing resources? And along with that, we all have a functional role to play in the ecosystem, like for example, plants take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and make sure that not too much carbon dioxide is present in the air. They perform photosynthesis, because of which many other organisms, can obtain their nourishment. That is the role of plants. We have some role to play. We take oxygen from the atmosphere, give carbon dioxide that plants can use, and once we die, we get decomposed, and whatever nutrients we had in our body, that will get returned to the soil and the plants can make use of it. Microbes will act upon us and eat us up and obtain nourishment from that. So ultimately every organism has an ecological role to play. All of that together is the niche of an organism. Okay, so each organism has an invariably defined range of conditions that it can tolerate, diversity in the resources that it can utilize, and a distinct functional role in the ecological system. All these together comprise its niche. Now we have to discuss the different abiotic components. Let's start with temperature. Temperature is by far the most important ecologically relevant environmental factor. That is what NCERT itself says. You know, the average temperature on land will vary from season to season. You can see on Earth there is a progressive decrease in temperature as you move from the equator to the poles. So if you can think of this as the Earth, and let's assume this is like the equator. Is it at the center? Wait. Okay, so let's assume this is like the equator. This is the North Pole and this is the South Pole. The temperature is always maximum at the equator. As you move towards the poles, there is like a progressive decrease. Let me just write it in terms of arrows. Highest is here, little lower than that here, little lower than that here, little lower than that here, and the least here, minimum at the poles. So that is what a progressive decrease means. As you're moving slightly away from the equator, there will be a constant decrease in the mean temperature as well. Also, you can see a decrease in when you consider mountains. Like let's say this is an area where there is a mountain. The temperature here in this case will progressively decrease from the plains to the mountain top. It's going to decrease. It's going to show a progressive decrease. Like every little you're moving away from the plains to the top of the mountain, you can see like a decrease in the temperature. So it decreases progressively from the equator to the poles, from the plains to the mountain tops as well. And you can see there are some places in our world where the temperature is sub-zero, like less than zero in negative, that is in the polar regions. And also you can see that in high altitude areas, right here at the poles, and also in high altitude areas, the temperature could be like really low. There are also habitats on our planet where the temperature can be greater than 500 degrees Celsius. You can see that in deserts during summer. You can see that in some places like the hot water springs, the temperature exceeds 100 degrees Celsius also. So such extremes also can be found. Okay. Now, why is temperature so important? It's important for one very crucial reason. You all have learned in the chapter biomolecules that every time a living chemical reaction is happening inside of living organisms, inside of our cells, It is mediated by enzymes. It is catalyzed by enzymes. The enzymes kind of, alter the rate of the reaction. They can enhance the speed of the reaction. That is what they do. And every single chemical reaction that's taking place inside of our cells, even right now, is mediated or catalyzed by enzymes. And you also learned that enzymes require a specific temperature to function. There is a temperature optimum, a range within which each enzyme can function to its best ability. I'm sure you remember that graph where you had temperature on the x-axis and enzyme activity on y-axis, and you know that for each enzyme the temperature range kind of varies, right? So if there is too much variation in our temperature, those enzymes will get denatured. If those enzymes get denatured at high temperature, they will not be able to function normally. How do enzymes function? They function by lock and key model. If it gets denatured, it will lose its shape. Its active site shape is gone. It can no longer bind to the substrate and convert it into the product. Then that reaction will not happen. As a result, we can experience a wide variety of symptoms and problems, right? So temperature affects the kinetics of enzymes, as a result of which our metabolic activity and physiological functions are also affected. If you look at nature, there are some organisms which can tolerate a wide range of temperatures, like humans. You find humans living in igloos even in the polar regions. You find humans living in Ecuador, very close to the equator, where the temperature is super high. Humans are found pretty much everywhere. We are able to, survive in a wide range of temperatures. However, every living organism is not capable of that. Very few organisms have the ability to thrive in wide range of temperatures. Most of them don't have that ability. Now, depending upon whether they can survive in a wide range of temperatures or not, you can classify living organisms into two types. Okay, this is entirely based on their tolerance level to varying temperature. The first category is eurythermal and the second category is stenothermal. You know that thermal is generally associated with temperature and heat, right? Very few organisms like us are able to tolerate and thrive in a wide range of temperatures. So that is eurythermal. Example for that is us. Stenothermal, many organisms don't have that ability. They are called stenothermal. So they tolerate only a narrow range of temperatures. Now, depending upon whether you are eurythermal or stenothermal, your distribution on this planet will vary. If somebody or some organism has tolerance to a wide range of temperatures, then they'll be found in a large part of our globe. But if an organism has a very narrow range, like the polar bear, it cannot survive in areas where the temperature is higher than in the polar regions. It has a very narrow range. So such organisms are not distributed everywhere on our planet. It's restricted to the poles. You don't find them in temperate regions, right? You don't find them in tropical regions, right? So its distribution depends on its tolerance. Okay? So the level of thermal tolerance of different organisms determine their geographical distribution. All right. Now, let's talk about the second factor, abiotic factor, which is water. Another most important factor influencing life of organisms, of course, is water. And also, you may have learned in the chapter evolution that water, it is within water that life originated, and also without water, life itself is unsustainable, because inside of cells you have cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the main area where a lot of chemical reactions take place, and cytoplasm itself is mostly water, right? So that is why water is absolutely essential. The availability of water is very, very less in deserts, and because the availability of water is so less and water is so important, unless these desert organisms have adapted, have evolved certain adaptations, they will not be able to survive there. You know, you've learnt about this in the chapter Morphology of Flowering Plants. I've told you how the plants that grow in deserts, the leaves are reduced to spines, the stem takes up the function of photosynthesis, it's thick, fleshy and succulent. Unless they've adapted like that, they will not be able to survive. Okay? So only special adaptations make it possible for organisms to live there. The productivity and distribution of plants is also heavily dependent on water, of course. Productivity, basically, more about it you learn in the next chapter. Productivity is, for us, my productivity is how well I can deliver lectures in a day, in a working day. How many classes can I take? That is my productivity. Your productivity as a student is how well you can study, how focused you can be. A plant's productivity is how well it can photosynthesize. Since photosynthesis requires water as a raw material, its availability will definitely impact the productivity, right? If availability is less, then photosynthesis will be less. As a result, productivity also will be less. And yeah, availability of water will, impact the distribution of plants as well. Not all plants can grow everywhere. Certain plants require more amount of water to grow. Such plants will not be able to grow in deserts. Okay? Now, for aquatic organisms specifically, organisms that grow in water bodies, the quality of water becomes a very important factor. What is the quality of water? Quality of water depends on two important factors. One is the pH of water and one is the salinity of water. Okay, so first you have pH, and then you have chemical composition, basically the salts that are present in it, whatever nutrients are dissolved in it, that it becomes important. Over here, the salt concentration is measured in terms of ppt, parts per thousand. Salt concentration is basically salinity, of course you would know. In different water bodies, the salinity will vary. In inland water, which is water bodies found inside the landmass like rivers, lakes and ponds, it's not very saline. Freshwater bodies, over there the salinity is very low, just about 5 ppt. In seas, you can see salinity will be around 30 to 35 ppt. It's right here, but it's not visible. Let me write it here, 30 to 35 parts per thousand. Whereas in certain hypersaline lagoons, it can be greater than 100 ppts. So depending upon, again, the tolerance to salinity, you have different groups of organisms. One group is called urihaline, the other group is called stenohaline. Urihaline organisms are fewer in number compared to stenohaline. Urihaline organisms can tolerate a wide range of salinity, whereas stenohaline has a narrow range. Okay, so many of these freshwater animals, whatever animals, fishes that live normally in freshwater, they will die if you move them to seawater. Many animals that live in seawater, salt water, will die if you move them to freshwater, transfer them to freshwater, because of the difference in salinity. They cannot maintain it. Maintain osmoregulation will become a problem. Okay, so yeah, that's the thing. Next, we have to talk about light. Light is very, very important, mostly for plants, of course for animals also, but mostly for plants, because photosynthesis is directly dependent on light. Light availability will be there. It will vary across different parts of the world, and also in certain regions, like even if you consider tropical rainforests, it's not like, see, if this is our globe, if this is our earth, this is the equator. Here, if you have like the sunlight, the sunlight, maximum sunlight is received in the tropical region around the equator. Even though sunlight is more here, there are certain ecosystems like the tropical rainforest that you find here, where light availability can become an issue. You have like very tall trees forming a canopy, relatively smaller trees also being present. Because they are blocking the light, the plants that grow on the surface of land, for them, availability of light can become limiting. Okay, so even under very low light conditions, these plants would have adapted themselves to grow. Many species of small plants, of herbs and shrubs growing in forests are adapted to photosynthesize optimally under very low light conditions, because they are constantly overshadowed by tall canopy trees. Also, what is important is the quality of solar radiation. If you give green color light throughout the day for a plant, it will still not be able to photosynthesize, because chlorophyll cannot absorb green light. the quality of light, which wavelength of light are you supplying to the plant. If it's blue or red, then brilliant, because they photosynthesize maximally at blue or red wavelengths of light. Okay, so the spectral quality of solar radiation is also important for life, and that is because all the color components of visible spectrum are not available for marine plants living at different depths of ocean. You know that light cannot penetrate very deep inside the ocean. There are many animals that are present at the extreme bottom of the ocean where it's complete darkness. They don't even know that something called light exists. So light does not penetrate everywhere. In such regions, you don't find plants growing. And yeah, so all of these are factors that you should remember about light. Also, there's another thing called photoperiodism. Photoperiodism basically is how plants depend on the period of or the duration of light they obtain from the sun in order to produce flowers. Different plants will have different preferences. Some plants will require a critical duration of daylight and a critical dark period in order to flower. So you have different types of plants there. More about that you would learn in a chapter called Plant Growth and Development earlier, but after rationalization that has gotten deleted. Just remember, plants depend on light cues for flowering as well. Okay, that is called photoperiodism. Now let's move on to importance of light for animals. We know that the intensity of light and the duration of light varies every day, like through the day if you look at it. In a day, during the mornings, evenings till evening, there is light, and then at night, of course, there is no light. The duration of light varies every 24 hours, and also the intensity of light varies through the day. For as long as light is present during the mornings, it's not equally intense throughout the day. So the intensity also varies, the duration also varies. Everyday variation, day and night variation is called diurnal variation. Okay. This happens every day, and also during different seasons, the duration and intensity of light will vary. Like for example, during summer you have longer days compared to winters. The brightness period is longer during summer compared to winters. Again, the reason is the tilt of the Earth's axis. So there are a lot of animals, birds and fishes that rely on these variations in light for a lot of their activities. For example, if you consider nocturnal animals like bats and cockroaches, they get out to forage and find food only at night, right? They depend on the light to perform their activities. For reproduction, for migration, for all of these different things, animals depend on light, and they rely on the cues that they get from variation in light intensity and duration that happens every day, diurnal as well as seasonal variations. Okay. Also, like I mentioned, not all animals on this planet know the existence of sun. Many animals that live at the bottom of the ocean where sunlight cannot penetrate at all and there's complete darkness, they don't even know that light exists. Okay. And also, not all wavelengths of light are beneficial for humans. There are some harmful wavelengths also, like UV can cause mutations and lead to cancer, skin cancer and all of that, right? So even within the light, there are certain wavelengths which can be harmful for animals. Now, similar to how we saw that temperature is not uniform throughout the world, water availability is not uniform throughout the world, light availability is not uniform throughout the world, and even similarly, soil, the kind of soil that you find on our planet, it's not the same everywhere. The type of soil varies from one place to another. Now, what is the reason for this variation? Firstly, it depends on the climate in that area. Secondly, the process of weathering or how the soil development has happened. Weathering, I'm sure all of you know, big rocks break into smaller particles and then eventually form soil. That can happen in multiple ways because of physical weathering is there, chemical weathering is there. Biological organisms can release chemicals and cause weathering of rocks. Depending upon how the weathering process has happened, depending upon how the soil development has happened, there also, because of that difference also, soil can vary from one place to another. Another factor that determines what the soil properties are is whether the soil is transported or whether it is residual. There are two types of soil. Now let's say there are rocks in one area, weathering has happened, soil formation has happened and soil has formed, and the soil that has formed is right there. Such soils are called residual soils. Sedimentary soils are those soils that are carried off from the place that they are formed, and then they go and settle elsewhere. They are called sedimentary or transported soils. Now it depends on that also. Now what are some characteristics of soil that determine what kind of plants grow there? We'll understand. For plants to grow, two factors of the soil are very important. Firstly, it is percolation. Secondly, it is water holding capacity. What is percolation? See, right now, if you have soil particles like this, okay, very far off from each other, the water that is used as irrigation or naturally rainfall, if the soil particles are too far away from each other, not compact enough, they are not aggregated properly, then the soil that you, the water that you add, or naturally whatever rainfall happens, all of that water will seep down and will not be available to the plant roots that are growing there. For a soil to support plants very well, percolation has to happen. If all of the water that you've used for irrigation stay right there all the time, that is also not good. Because aeration will become a problem, then oxygen will not be available to the roots. Okay, roots also require oxygen for respiration, right? You know about that. But percolation is necessary. To what extent? If the soil will allow percolation of water about 50 to 100 ml per hour, that is considered a soil good for agriculture. If you take sand, of course, since the sand grains are not very compactly aggregated, percolation will be very high. They will have very low water holding capacity. Because of that, they cannot support plants very well. Okay, so that is percolation. Water holding capacity means how much water can the soil hold. It should hold sufficient amount of water. It shouldn't hold too much water. Percolation also should not be too much. So there should be a balance. Okay. So yeah, what determines the water holding capacity and percolation of the soil? The soil composition. What is it composed of? What is the size of the grains in the soil? If there are too big, then percolation will be more, water holding capacity will be very less. What kind of microbes are there in the soil? How is the aggregation of the soil? All of these things matter. Along with that, the pH of the soil, the nutrients that are present in the soil, mineral composition. Because remember, plants obtain their nutrients, minerals from the soil itself. The mineral composition, the topography of that land, all of that will determine what kind of plants can grow there. The plants that grow in tropical forest soils cannot grow in the desert, right? So plants can grow only in certain types of soil. Certain plants can only grow in certain types of soils. All right. So depending upon what type of soil is there in an area, plants will grow. Corresponding plants will grow. Now, depending upon what kind of plants are growing there, animals will grow. Okay. So what determines which plants will grow in an area? The composition of the soil and all of these factors that we talked about. What kind of animals do you find in an area? What determines that? The kind of vegetation that you find there. Okay. So vegetation in an area is determined by these. Dependent on the vegetation are the animals that grow in that area. All right. Now we are done with all of these abiotic factors. Let's move on to the next part, response to abiotic factors. From the beginning, from the time we started talking about these abiotic factors, temperature, soil, water, light, all of that, I've been telling you that the surrounding environmental conditions tend to vary. What conditions are there, temperature conditions today, it may not be the same 3 days later or 1 month later or during a different season. How much rainfall is happening today may not be the same probably 6 months later. So we see a variation in all of these abiotic factors. But ideally, an organism is expected to maintain a constant internal environment regardless of changing external environment. My surrounding environment is constantly changing. Every day temperature varies. Every day light duration, light intensity varies. Water availability could vary. So, when the surrounding temperature, when the ambient conditions around me are constantly varying, it is ideal that regardless of what it is outside, I maintain a constant internal environment. Let's take temperature for example. During summers in Bangalore, you see like 36, 37 degrees Celsius, probably 30, 35 also degrees Celsius, you will see. But regardless of how much the temperature is outside, your body temperature will not change. If you go towards North India, probably Delhi, Noida, over there you can find probably the temperature, maximum temperature hitting 40 degrees Celsius during some time of the day. Just because the temperature outside you is 40 degrees Celsius, your body temperature does not increase to 40 degrees Celsius, right? Your body temperature, if you're healthy, remains around 37 degrees Celsius. Even if outside it's freezing cold, probably 10 degrees, 9 degrees Celsius, despite of it, our body temperature will remain 37 degrees Celsius. So regardless of the changes that are happening outside, your body internal environment tends to, if it remains stably, then it is called homeostasis. So homeostasis basically is a maintenance of constant internal environment despite varying external conditions that tend to upset it. Now, ideally, every organism, it is good if it can maintain a constant internal environment. But due to several reasons, not all organisms are capable of it. If organisms can, if they can afford to maintain a constant internal environment, well and good, it is good for them. But there are many organisms which can't, maintain a constant internal environment. What do such organisms do? There are very many different ways in which those organisms can respond to changing environmental conditions. We're going to learn about 4 such response to abiotic factors. The first one, regulate, confirm, migrate, suspend. We'll learn about each of them one by one. Starting with regulate. I told you we are able to maintain a constant internal temperature, that is called thermoregulation. If you talk about fishes that live in water, they will be able to maintain a constant internal osmotic concentration, that is osmoregulation. Even in our body there is blood, there are fluids, body fluids, right? The salts, the osmotic concentration of those fluids are also maintained at a particular range only. Okay, so that is called osmoregulation. Now some of these organisms have ability to regulate the internal environment, keep it constant despite of changing external environment by physiological means. Like for example, if the temperature exceeds 37 degrees outside, your body temperature will still be 37 degrees, because what do you do when it's too hot outside? You step out on a very hot sultry day, what do? You start sweating. What is the sweating for? The sweat that is produced on the surface of your skin, when it evaporates in the heat, it'll cool the surface of your body, thereby reducing your body temperature. What do you do when it's too cold? Behaviorally, by behavioral means you can add up more layers, you can put more jackets and sweaters and all of those things. But also what you do physiologically is you start shivering. What happens when you shiver? When you shiver, heat is generated in your body. Okay? So that will make sure that your body temperature is maintained at around 37 degrees Celsius. Okay? So this regulation can happen either by physiological means or by behavioral means. Now, how many organisms have the ability to regulate? Not many of them. All birds and mammals have the ability to regulate. Along with that, very few vertebrates and invertebrates also have ability to regulate, osmoregulation and thermoregulation. It is because of this very ability to regulate and maintain a constant internal environment that mammals are so successful, and you can find them pretty much in every part of the world, right? So I want you to notice in this graph how this line here represents regulators. On the x-axis you have external level, on the y-axis you have internal level. Regardless of how much the external level is changing, the internal level is not changing. It is remaining constant. right? So they are called regulators. Now let's talk about conformers. Around 99% of all animals and nearly all plants are conformers. They don't have it in them to regulate and maintain a constant internal environment. They tend to change their internal environment with respect to external environment. Okay, so such organisms are called conformers. You can see in the graph over here this dark green line that I'm going to outline right now. So you can see how as the external level is changing, the internal level is also changing. They are called conformers. The body temperature changes with the ambient temperature. Changes with ambient temperature means your surrounding temperature. Okay, if you look at aquatic animals that are conformers, according to how their surrounding environmental concentration of salts and salinity changes, their internal osmotic concentration also will change. Okay, yeah, they are called conformers. Now, if ideally being regulators is beneficial, maintaining a constant internal environment is beneficial, then why don't all organisms do it? If conformers evolved first and found out that regulators are better, why didn't the conformers evolve to become regulators? If that was beneficial, then why haven't conformers evolved to become regulators? Over here, we must understand that thermoregulation is energetically very, very expensive. Maintaining a constant internal temperature, regardless of the changes outside, costs a lot of energy in terms of ATP, and not everybody can afford it. Let's take example, one middle class household in India where 4 people are living, one person is earning, he's getting 20,000 rupees per month. He has his eyes on a Nike Air shoes which cost probably 10, 12,000, 15,000, I don't know. And also what he must do with that money is make sure there is food for everybody in the house, the bills are paid on time, he has enough money for fuel for his vehicle and all of that. So likewise, even these animals, they will have some amount of energy. Energy is required for a lot of metabolic functions, for synthesis of proteins, for synthesis of DNA, for growth, all of that requires energy, right? Now, if whatever 20,000 rupees that person got, he spends 15,000 rupees to buy a pair of shoes, then he'll be left with very little money, and that will not be sufficient to manage all of the other things that he should have taken care of. Same thing will happen with these animals and organisms also. Whatever limited energy they have, they can utilize, they can afford to utilize. If they're utilizing most of it for thermal regulation itself, then they will not have sufficient energy required for the necessary metabolic activities. Now, it's okay if you don't wear a Nike shoes. What matters more is that there is food on the plate for everybody in your house. Likewise, even for these animals, it's okay if they cannot regulate their body temperature. More important for them right now is the other metabolic activities that require energy. Over there, that person could not afford money to buy shoes. Over here, they cannot afford energy for thermoregulation. Since it's too expensive, it's beyond their budget, energy budget, they cannot do it. Okay? So, why is there a problem? Because, especially for small animals, take for example shrews, they are very tiny, they are tiny mammals. Take very small birds like hummingbird. Compare that with bigger animals. What is the difference that you see? Over here, the surface area with respect to volume is, the surface area is more. But in larger animals like us and polar bears, you can find that with respect to the volume, comparatively, surface area is less. Whenever the surface area is less in small animals, they tend to lose heat a lot. Okay. Therefore, it becomes very expensive for them to regulate. Thermoregulation becomes expensive. Now, previously I told you that all mammals and all birds are thermoregulators. Now I'm saying shrews and hummingbirds find it very difficult to regulate because it's very expensive. This line is given under conformers. Students get confused that they are conformers, but they are not actually conformers. They are used as examples to show you how for smaller animals, thermoregulation becomes very expensive. It's expensive for them, but they're still thermoregulators. But not every animal, every small animal can do that. Small lizards and smaller reptiles, they cannot afford to do it. Okay? So particularly for small animals like shrews and hummingbirds, heat loss or heat gain is a function of surface area. Small animals have large surface area relative to their volume. So they tend to lose their body heat very fast when it's cold outside. Then they have to expend more energy to generate body heat through metabolism. That is the reason why wherever the climate is very cold, like in the polar regions, you don't find that many small animals. You mostly find big mammals, right? It's not like they're completely absent, but they are less. Okay? That is the main reason why small animals are rarely found in polar regions. During the course of evolution, again, you will consider the cost and benefit. Because it is not affordable, they do not evolve to become thermoregulators. Okay? And also, there are certain species which over the time have evolved to become partial regulators. What they do is, over a range, they can regulate. Just a moment. But beyond that, they just conform. You can see how these partial regulators, initially when there is change in external level, internal level is also changing, but beyond one point they have become regulators, they maintaining constant internal environment. Okay. Now, whenever the unfavorable conditions are restricted to a small geographical area or to one geographical area, or whenever that unfavorable condition which the organism cannot tolerate is limited in duration, it is not permanent, it is not only limited to a certain duration, organisms choose other ways, they respond by other ways. When there is unfavorable condition only in one region, what they can do is migrate. Right now it is not suitable for me. I cannot survive here. Right now I'm a conformer. If there is change in external environment, it is going to affect my internal environment as well. Or because I am a regulator, but thermoregulation is becoming beyond what I can spend in terms of energy. In that case, if it's becoming too difficult to survive in an area because of the climatic conditions, what organisms can do is leave that area and go to some other area until this area becomes favorable again. A lot of birds and mammals, you can see, they migrate from different parts of the world to different parts of the world because the conditions there become hostile, they become unfavorable. Either it's too cold or too hot, or let's say the water scarcity is there, or for whatever reason, organisms travel long distances from where the conditions are stressful meaning not favorable, to a more suitable condition. This is only for a period. After that season, the conditions will become favorable in the original place and they will return. It's not like they've permanently moved away. They will return. Okay? So particularly birds that migrate from north to south during winters to escape from that harsh cold. You know, in Bharatpur wetlands in Rajasthan, you can see birds that come from Siberia, Mongolia, Russia, and all of these very cold places because relatively Rajasthan is a little warmer. In Rajasthan, you have 𝐿𝐴𝐿 National Park, that is Bharatpur wetlands. Over there, you can see find these Siberian cranes. All the way from Siberia to Rajasthan, they migrate to tide over unfavorable conditions. Now, what is the other thing that they can do? If it is only for a short period of time, they will suspend, they will escape in time. I'm sure all of you have heard about summer sleep and winter sleep in lower grades like hibernation and estivation. Hibernation is also called winter sleep. Whenever the conditions around ambient temperature becomes very low and spending energy for that becomes, it's beyond your budget even for mammals, what they do is they reduce their metabolic rate a lot and they go into a state of hibernation. Okay, you can see that in polar bears during winter. You know, polar regions are cold as it is, but during winters in polar regions, it's like super cold. So even regulators cannot, you know, energetically spend so much to, you know, maintain a constant internal environment at that point. So they just go for hibernation to tide over the harsh winter. Whenever the summer heat is too much, organisms get into what is called summer sleep or aestivation. This you can see in snails and certain reptiles and even frogs, fish, uh, diapause. This you can see in some insects and even in some zooplanktons. You know, there are many developmental stages in insects, like there's egg, larva, pupa and then adult. When the conditions around are not favorable, they will stall their development. They will not develop further. They will suspend their development. They will stop developing further until the return of favorable conditions. Once the favorable conditions return, they will continue to develop. That is called diapause. You can see that in zooplankton as well as certain insects. Dormancy. About dormancy, we've learned with respect to seed. Seeds, they don't germinate. We say that they are dormant. Generally, you can find this seed dormancy in plants. Bacteria, fungi and lower plants like algae, they also produce spores specifically to tide over unfavorable conditions, which will have very thick walls. So those walls, those spores will be dormant. Because of the thick wall, they are kind of insulated from the harsh external environment. Once the conditions become favorable, they will germinate and give rise to new organisms. You can see even in higher plants that the axillary bud, the terminal bud, all of these will become dormant when the conditions are not favorable. Once it is favorable, then it will germinate. Okay, so that's about the fourth point, which is suspend. Suspend means escaping in time to avoid stress. Now, I told you earlier how organisms, unless they are adapted to live in harsh conditions, cannot survive there. We have to learn about how certain animals and plants are adapted to live in harsh climatic conditions. We'll start with how animals are adapted to live in deserts. A kangaroo rat shows physiological adaptation to survive in a desert. Kangaroo rat is a very small mammal. You know, the problem in deserts is that there is water scarcity. There is no freely available water. So kangaroo rat has adapted itself in such a way that at least whatever water is available in its body, it should not go out waste. Okay, so it tries as much as possible to conserve whatever water is available in its body. We are 70% made of water, right? So if it does not get water to consume, what it does is it obtains water because of some metabolic reactions that happen inside our cells. When fats or triglycerides are broken down, water is released as a byproduct. So they oxidize fats, and because of that fat oxidation, whatever water is released, they will utilize that itself. And all of us, all mammals, will have the ability to concentrate our urine. Whatever filtrate enters your kidney tubules, the same filtrate is not excreted out in our urine. You know that there are a lot of loops and convoluted tubules that are present in the nephron, where reabsorption of water from the filtrate happens and we produce a concentrated urine. These kangaroo rats take it to the next level. They concentrate it so much that you can literally see crystals in their urine. Okay, so that way they conserve as much water they can as possible, so that they can survive even in such water scarce conditions. Okay, now that's about how it is physiologically adapted to live in deserts. Now let's talk about behavioral adaptation. Lizards. Lizards are not regulators, they are conformers. They cannot thermoregulate. So what do? By their behavioral means, they will make sure that there is not too much variation in the internal environment. When it's too cold, what do? They go and bask in the sun. When it's too hot outside, what do? They will go and go towards the shade. So with their behavior, they will try to maintain. Okay. Some of them, these reptiles are capable of burrowing inside the soil also to escape from the heat. Okay. Now, talking about plants, desert plants adaptations, we've learnt about it briefly in the chapter Morphology of Flowering Plants. We know how Stomata are present on the surface of leaves, and through these stomata exchange of gases will happen, and also what happens is a process called transpiration, which is loss of water in the form of vapor. Since the temperature in deserts is very high, plants tend to lose a lot of water through these stomata. So to reduce the rate of transpiration in these plants, the stomata will be sunken. That means stomata has guard cells, and the guard cells are epidermal cells. They are present at the same level as the epidermal cells, but these guard cells are not present at the surface, they are slightly deeper. Okay, so you can see over here like this, it is sunken, and it will have certain trichomes also present, so that will reduce the rate of transpiration. Talking about the cactus plant, the leaf and the stem both are modified. The leaves are reduced to spines, that prevents herbivory and also reduces the rate of transpiration. The stem becomes thick, succulent and green. That also is an adaptation. Okay? Another adaptation that we have to learn about is called CAM pathway. Crassulacean acid metabolism is called. Certain desert plants, like I think aloe and all of these plants, they exhibit CAM pathway. What they do is, if they keep this stomata open during the day, you know that transpiration rate will be very high. They will lose a lot of water. So to make sure that they don't lose a lot of water, they don't open the stomata during the day at all. But if they don't open the stomata during the day, how will they get carbon dioxide for photosynthesis? I'll tell you, it's interesting. They open the stomata at night. During night, light intensity will be less, temperature will be less, rate of transpiration is less. So they will open the stomata at night. During night, whatever carbon dioxide enters the plant, that carbon dioxide is added to another molecule to form a C4 acid. Okay, at night what happens is, here stomata is open, carbon dioxide enters the plant through the stomata, similar to what happens in C4 plants. Remember, phosphoenol pyruvate and then carbon dioxide carboxylation happens, C4 acid is formed. That C4 acid is formed and it will be stored in the vacuole. During the day, what happens? The stomata closes. Whatever C4 acid is there, that will get decarboxylated and become the C3 acid. The carbon dioxide is utilized in Calvin cycle during the day, but stomata will not be open. So photosynthesis happens despite stomata being closed during the day, because at night it is open, carbon dioxide is picked up and stored in the form of a C4 acid. During the day, that will get decarboxylated and the carbon dioxide released will get utilized in Calvin cycle. Alright, so this is another adaptation. This is a physiological adaptation. Now let's talk about adaptation in polar animals. There's something called Allen's rule that you must learn here. What he says is, wherever there are colder climates, specifically the mammals that are found there, they will have very small and short limbs and ears to reduce heat loss. I've told you even earlier, in cold regions, the loss of body heat will happen very rapidly. To reduce heat loss, extremities are reduced. Ears for rabbits and hares will be generally very big, right? But this Arctic hare found in the polar regions has relatively smaller ears. Foxes will have larger ears comparatively, like the normal other foxes. But this fox has very small teddy bear like ear. That reduces, even their limbs are very short. That reduces loss of heat. Okay? Yeah. Another thing is, they will have blubber under their skin, which is like an insulator. If this is the skin, you can see like so much fat underneath. We call that blubber. It's a thick layer of fat. You can see that in seals. And this will act like an insulator. You can see how this is almost like 5 centimeters, roughly. That much amount of, just about that much of fat will be present right underneath the skin and acts as an insulator and reduces loss of heat from the surface of the body. High altitude regions, what happens? Organisms start adapting according to the problems that they are facing. In desert, what is the problem? The problem was that there's a water scarcity. Water availability is a limitation, is the main issue there. So plants try to conserve as much water as they can by various adaptations. Animals try to conserve as much water as they can. When you go to polar regions, what was the problem? The issue was that they would lose a lot of body heat rapidly. To make sure that is reduced, they have their adaptations. Over here, what is the problem? At high altitudes, air pressure is a problem. We all are aerobic organisms. We require oxygen to survive, and we take that oxygen from our atmosphere. Partial pressure of oxygen also will be low when the air pressure is low. Okay, as a result, it can cause altitude sickness. If you're somebody who climbs mountains and goes on treks, you may have experienced this. During these climbs, what happens is people will start feeling nausea, tiredness or fatigue, and heart palpitations. Why is that happening? That is because of the low pressure and low air density at higher altitudes. We will not get sufficient oxygen. Now, how do organisms take care of this? How are they adapted? If you're visiting a high altitude area temporarily, your body will make the necessary fixes. Short-term fixes are, firstly, breathing rate is increased. Whenever your tissues does not get sufficient oxygen, your body can sense that. You may have learnt about it in regulation of breathing in the chapter breathing and exchange of gases, and it will increase the respiratory rate, the breathing rate. The more frequently you breathe, the more air gushes into your lungs, more oxygen enters your bloodstream. All of that will happen. That's one thing that happens. Secondly, what could happen is the binding efficiency of hemoglobin to oxygen will decrease. So when it goes to the tissues, the oxygen can easily be dissociated from hemoglobin and supplied to the tissues. Okay, so decrease in binding affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen. Next, long term, for organisms or people that live in those areas permanently, if you check their RBC count compared to ours, they will have more number of RBCs. More RBCs means more hemoglobin means more oxygen binding and more oxygen delivery to the tissues, right? So how exactly does that happen? Whenever oxygen levels are low in the blood, the kidneys can detect that. Remember, blood gets transported throughout the body to all of our cells. That is what delivers oxygen and nutrients. So the kidneys have a mechanism to sense that there is low oxygen being supplied in blood, and as a result, they will release a hormone called erythropoietin. Now, this erythropoietin is released by your kidneys into your bloodstream. Your blood carries blood everywhere throughout the body. It will carry it to your bones also, to the bone marrow also it is transported. So this erythropoietin acts on the bone marrow and it will stimulate your bone marrow to produce more RBCs. Erythro is about RBCs, okay? Erythropoiesis is the process by which RBCs form and mature in your bone marrow. So this erythropoietin will stimulate the bone marrow where RBCs are formed and mature to synthesize more RBCs. And as a result, they can, thrive even in such low pressure areas. All right. That's about how organisms or animals are adapted in high altitude regions. With that, we have come to the end of the organisms part or the first part of this chapter. Now what we are left with is the populations part. I've told you already in the beginning of this session what a population means. Population is a group of individuals that occupy a particular well-defined geographical area. It should belong to the same species. Okay, so population can be defined as a group of individuals belonging to the same species occupying a particular geographical area. If you see in nature, no species, organisms are present isolated, single. Okay, always generally they will be in a group only. So they live in groups in well-defined geographical areas. And over there, since they belong to the same species, they will potentially interbreed and also they will share similar resources. Some examples of population I will give you, whatever is mentioned in your NCERT textbook. Whenever we're talking about a population, we always make sure that it's belonging to one species only and in a well-defined geographical area. For example, cormorants in a wetland. In a wetland, what cormorants are a type of birds. So that species in a wetland. Rat in an abandoned dwelling. Rats in abandoned dwelling. In one kind of old house probably that is abandoned. How many rats are there? That is one rat population. Teakwood trees in a forest tract. Fishes, probably clownfishes in an aquarium. So one species, one geographical area. Okay, bacteria in a culture plate, lotus plants in a pond. All of these are examples of populations. Now, a population has certain features or attributes that an individual organism will not have. If you remember, when we spoke about the different levels of biological organization, I mentioned how it started with macromolecules and cells and tissues and organs and organism and population, right? There are certain attributes that an organism has which a population does not have. There are certain attributes that a population has which an organism does not have. Those population attributes which are there for a population but not applicable to an individual organism are called population attributes. For example, if you consider a living organism, one organism, it will have birth and death, right? Because it's one individual organism. But for a population, since there are more number of individuals belonging to a species, in that population, you can calculate a birth rate and a death rate. An individual organism will not have a birth rate and a death rate, which a population will have. So that is birth rate and death rate are population attributes. Likewise, if you consider the sex of an organism, either the male or it's female, but in a population which is a group of individuals, you can have like a sex ratio, 30% males, 70% females, 50% males, 50% females, 40% females, 60% males. These kind of ratios, sex ratio can be present in a population. So there are three population attributes that you have to remember. One is birth rate, second is death rate, third is sex ratio. Now, what is birth rate? Birth rate is basically per capita births, okay? Birth rate is calculated over a period of time. Whenever rate comes into picture, of course, we are looking at a period of time, right? Time also comes in. So, in a population, over a period of time, it could be 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, whatever, a specific period of time, how many births have happened divided by how many individuals are present initially. So, what is the per capita contribution to that birth is what we call birth rate, okay? A population has certain attributes which an individual organism does not. For example, an individual will have birth and death, but a population will have birth rate and death rate, which is basically per capita birth and death. I'll give you an example for birth rate. In one pond, there were apparently 20 lotus plants to begin with. Over 1 year, through reproduction, 8 new plants have formed over there. So what will be the birth rate? How many new plants are born or formed because of birth? 8. How many were initially present? 20. So per capita, that means 8 divided by 20. That will give the contribution of each lotus plant present in that population. You will not get like a whole number in birth rate. See, over here, 8 divided by 20 will give you 0.4 offspring. Can 0.4% of an individual form? What is 0.4 offspring? 1 offspring, 2 offsprings, 3 makes sense. What is 0.4? Here we are not saying that 0.4% of, or what do you say, that portion of an individual is formed. That's not what we mean. What we mean to say is there is 0.4 organisms contribution per plant over that period of time. Okay? So even while you write it, you're going to write it as 0.4 offspring per lotus per year. Death rate is also very similar. There's an example of fruit flies given in your NCERT textbook. In a lab where they were culturing fruit flies, 40 fruit flies were apparently present at the beginning of the week. Towards the end of the week, 4 of them apparently died. So through that period, through that 1 week, what was the death rate? 4 have died. How much were present initially? 40 were present. 4 divided by 40 will give you 0.1. That is the death rate. If I'm saying 0.1 fruit fly death rate, it's not like 0.1 of fruit fly can die, right? That is basically telling us the contribution of each fruit fly in that population. Okay, 0.1 individuals per fruit fly per week. Okay, so that is your death rate. And sex ratio I've already mentioned. Since it's a population which involves a lot of organisms, a lot of individuals, sex ratio is possible in a population, not possible in an individual. Okay, now let's talk about age pyramids. Take any population, for example, not necessarily humans. Take any population. Let's consider humans because it's convenient. If you take a population of humans in your street, whichever street you live in, you have individuals belonging to different age groups. There are like old people, there are like uncles, aunties, middle-aged people, probably in my age. There are teenagers in your age level. There are probably middle school going kids, there are toddlers, there are very young babies, there are babies that are younger than 1 year old, infants. So you have organisms belonging to different age groups. You go to a crop field, you don't have all the plants that belong to the same age, right? So little variation will be there. You will have smaller saplings, you will have coconut trees that are like really tall, smaller coconut trees. So in any population, in any organism, you can see that organisms will belong to different age groups. Now, if you plot the percentage of individuals in different age groups in a graph, what you get is called an age pyramid. Over here, what we do is you consider the entire population and categorize them into 3 different groups. These 3 different groups depend on the reproductive ability of those organisms, primarily reproductive ability. That is the criterion we're using for classification. So what basically happens here is, the 3 categories or the 3 groups are pre-reproductive individuals, reproductive individuals, and post-reproductive individuals. You know, when an organism is born, it immediately does not have the ability to reproduce. Humans, the moment we are born, they cannot reproduce. Probably around early teenage, 13, 14 years of age, you hit puberty and you obtain the ability to reproduce. Likewise, for flowering plants, if you consider, the moment a seed germinates and becomes like a small tiny plant or a sapling, it will not produce flowers to reproduce. It will take some time to grow vegetatively and then produce flowers, right? So the time the organisms or the individuals in that population who haven't yet gained the ability to reproduce, they are grouped under pre-reproductive individuals. Very simple, pre-reproductive, before obtaining or before gaining the reproductive ability. Second group is reproductive individual. So that group, reproductive age group, they have attained reproductive maturity. They are now capable of performing reproduction. So such individuals are put in that group, probably 13, 14 years of age onwards. Till they have retained the reproductive ability, they will be in that group. If you consider females, probably around like 50-ish, they lose their ability to reproduce. Menstrual cycle will stop, menopause will happen. So till then, they are in that reproductive age group. For males, it's a little longer. Okay. Once they lose their ability to reproduce, they will be in the post-reproductive age group. They had the ability to reproduce, which they no longer have. So they are grouped under post-reproductive individuals. Based on the percentage of individuals present in these age groups, we construct what is called as age pyramids. When you're doing this for human population, it is possible to represent the males and females also in the same diagram. Like this side you can see males, this side you can see females. Over here you can see certain numbers, right? There is 0 and 20 and 40, 60 and 80, 100. And over here you can see 0, 20 million, 20 million, 40, 60 million. Now 0 means they are not even 1 year old yet. So how many individuals are less than 1 year old? Are about probably 50 million. That is why that bar is long. Next you have 5, 10, 15, 20. Excuse me. So depending upon the age, we will group them like this. Over here, just because I mentioned pyramids, it's not always going to be triangular. Its shape can vary. The shape of the pyramid reflects the growth status of the population. That means today I'm plotting an age pyramid for one particular state, one particular country. By looking at that shape of the pyramid, I can kind of predict the future of that state with respect to population. In the future, is this state's population expected to increase in number, or is it going to decrease in number, or is it going to remain the same as it is? It all depends on the pre-reproductive individual population mostly. In comparison with the reproductive individuals, over here you can see 3 different colors, yellow, blue and pink. Whatever is in yellow represents the pre-reproductive individuals. By convention, pre-reproductive will be the lowest. In the middle, you will have reproductive, and on top, you will have post-reproductive. How wide this yellow bar is determines how many individuals are present in that age group. What percentage of individuals is present in that age group. If you look at this pyramid right here, maximum individuals are present in the pre-reproductive age group. In the last one, the number of pre-reproductive individuals is very less. Now compare reproductive with pre-reproductive. Over here, reproductive is more, pre-reproductive is more, reproductive is less. What will happen in future? Reproductive will become post-reproductive, pre-reproductive will become reproductive, right? So over here, In the future, since the number of individuals that will replace this category are more than the current population, it is it is bound to expand. It will increase in number. Such pyramids will be triangular. You can see over here, the shape is triangular. Over here you can see that the age pyramid is bell-shaped. There's not much of a difference between pre-reproductive and reproductive. Whatever number of individuals are there currently, the same number will be replaced in the future. So the reproductive rate will be pretty much the same, and there's not too much of a deviation in population size. Last one is urn-shaped. I want you to notice how the pre-reproductive individuals here are less in number than reproductive individuals. So if these become old, these are the ones that are going to replace this. Reproductive rate will come down. As a result, the population in future will come down. All right. So it is a declining population. This is kind of urn-shaped. These are the three different types of age pyramids. Now let's talk about the population size. What is the size? Population size means population size basically, generally it's measured in terms of numbers. How many number of individuals are present in a population? It gives an idea about its status in the habitat, the status of that organism in that habitat. Now the size need not be fixed. Okay, there is no fixed range for that size. It's not like in a population there should be minimum 100 individuals, nothing like that. Anything more than one can be considered as a population. If you consider the Siberian cranes, I told you they come to Bharatpur wetlands for migration earlier when I spoke about migration. So there will be Siberian cranes in Bharatpur wetlands of Rajasthan any time of the year. Around 10 of them at least will be there. So that is a population of Siberian cranes in Bharatpur wetland. Take like one handful of pond water. You can see thousands and thousands of Chlamydomonas there, unicellular green alga there. Okay, so there is no fixed number. It could be as low as like 10 and as high as millions, right? The Siberian cranes is less than 10. Chlamydomonas in a handful might be around in thousands, but if you consider like an entire pond, it could run to millions. So the population size can vary in nature. Now, what is the importance of population size? You can evaluate many different ecological processes by studying the population size. For example, outcome of competition with another species. Let's say there was not much competition in an area. There was one type of herbivorous organism in a grassland. It was feeding on grass, happy, reproducing. Then from some other area, a new herbivore came there. There is competition for food now. After that competition, did the number of these initially, whatever herbivorous animals were present, did their number decrease? Did this competition affect them or not? If it affected them, how drastic is it? How much is the change in number? You can evaluate that if you have a count of how many herbivores were present initially. Impact of predator. If a predator enters that habitat, because of that predator's presence, is there any drastic decrease in the number of the prey population? Now let's say you are growing some crop in the land, in your agricultural farm. There are a lot of pests. You've sprayed some pesticide on your crop field. So you want to know how effective that pesticide was. Is it 100% effective? Have all the pests died? Is it only 50% effective? There were 100 earlier, right now there are 50. So if you have a number, a count, then it is easier to evaluate all of these processes. Okay? Yeah. Now let's talk about population density. Population density seems like a fancy word, but population density is just a technical term for population size itself, and it is represented by capital letter N. Now what is population? You know what density is. In physics you may have learnt, right? High population density means within one area, more number of individuals are present. I want you to notice both these diagrams and compare. The area is the same. There are more individuals here, comparatively less individuals here. There are less individuals here and comparatively more individuals here. Whenever there are more individuals, that means the population density is high. Okay? Generally, population density is measured in terms of numbers, but it's not necessary that every time you measure it in terms of numbers only, because sometimes it can be meaningless, sometimes it can be too time consuming, sometimes it can be impossible. Whenever it is not possible to sit and count all of these organisms, or for whatever reason numbers are not suitable, you can use other parameters to measure population density. I'll give you an example. Let's say there is an area, a geographical area with one huge banyan tree present, and right in that area you have 200 Parthenium plants. Now if I were to give the population density of banyan, it will be 1, and the population density of Parthenium will be 200. That means Parthenium population density is 200 times more than the banyan tree. If you do this, it will be meaningless because we are undermining the ecological role of the banyan tree. A banyan tree may be just a single plant compared to 200 Parthenium plants, but I'm sure the biomass and the productivity of that banyan tree will be much higher compared to all of these 200 Parthenium plants put together. These Parthenium plants don't generally support other organisms, but one big banyan tree, probably in its roots, a lot of microbes are surviving. Probably on its stem, a lot of different species of insects are surviving. Probably 2-3 different species of birds have formed a nest and laid eggs in its trunk. Also, there could be a lot of other insects and epiphytes growing on top of its branches. So, ecologically, the role of banyan tree is more compared to the 200 Parthenium. Even though it is one single banyan tree, it is ecologically much more significant compared to all 200 Parthenium plants put together. In such cases, you can measure it in terms of biomass. Okay, so percentage cover or how much area it's occupying or biomass. That will give us like a fair number, and we won't even be undermining the ecological significance of banyan tree in that case. Next, sometimes when counting is impossible or too time consuming, then we can take other parameters also. Like if you have to count how many fishes are present in a pond, like one species of fish, how many of them are present. You can't go inside water and put a tag on them and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is very time consuming and kind of impossible also. So instead of measuring everything, you can measure the relative density instead of absolute density. In order to find out how many Chlamydomonas is present in a pond, you know roughly how much water is present in a pond. If you can measure how much is present in 1 liter, you can do the calculations and find out approximately how many are present in the pond. If you just catch the fish in one trap, you can kind of get an idea of how many fish might actually be present in the pond or lake. So instead of measuring absolute densities, you can make do with relative densities whenever it's very time consuming, too laborious or impossible. In that cases, relative densities will work. Another thing is, sometimes it's impossible. Like if you have to count tiger, if you have to do like a tiger census, you have to know how many tigers are present in a forest area. You literally can't go and put a tag around the tiger's neck like you put it around cow's neck, right? Because it's a carnivorous, very ferocious animal. What do you do then? You can't go to a tiger and say, okay, I've taken this and put a seal on it and come. What do you do instead? Without even looking at a tiger, you can kind of find out how many tigers are present there. There are two ways in which you can do it. One is by the pug marks. If it walks on the ground, on the soil, it leaves its footprints like the pug marks. With that, apparently that is also unique like our fingerprint. So with that they can find out. Another thing is by collecting its fecal matter. Its fecal pellets, whatever excreta is there that they can find, they can do like a DNA analysis of that and they can find out how many tigers are present in an area. So these are different parameters which we can utilize to measure population density. Okay, that is indirect estimation. Without even looking at the organism, without actually counting them or seeing them, you're doing it. All right. Now let's talk about how population density is not stable. Population density, let's say I've measured it with respect to numbers. I'm talking about human population in my street, whichever street I'm living in. Today morning I measured, it was like 300 people, let's say. Okay, is this 300 number going to remain constant throughout? Not really. It's not a static parameter. It is going to change. It changes, how much a population density is depends on a lot of factors. It depends on how much food is available, what is the predation pressure these organisms are facing, how are the weather conditions, are they tolerable or are they too harsh and extreme. These are certain things. Okay. Now population density will change, and there are 4 major processes that are responsible for changes in population density. They are natality, mortality, immigration and emigration. Okay, natality is represented by capital B, mortality by capital D, immigration by capital letter I, emigration by capital letter E. I think I forgot to mention over here birth rate and death rate when we spoke about it. Birth rate and death rate. Birth rate is represented by lowercase b, death rate is represented by lowercase d. Okay, here we are talking about number of births and number of deaths, natality and mortality. Don't get confused between capital B, lowercase b, capital D, lowercase d. If it is lowercase, it is rate. If it is capital, it is mortality, natality. Okay. Natality basically is how many organisms are born in a population. Alright, so let's say I said that there are 300 individuals present in my street. In 2 houses somewhere, 2 new babies were born. So that increases the population density by 2, right? If there are births happening in a population, obviously the population density will increase. And also in 3 other families, people died. So whenever there is death or mortality, population size will come down. Immigration. People from the neighboring street, because people were born in 2 houses, people died in 3 houses, they wanted to visit these houses. They came from other localities to my street. Probably 30 people came. So now because 30 people have come to this population, the population density has increased. Some other houses, they had functions to attend, so they have left this street and gone elsewhere. That is emigration. From whatever population you belong to, if you're leaving that population and going to a new population in whatever time period we're considering, that is called emigration. Immigration means people entering our population. Okay. So whenever somebody comes to your population, there is an increase. Whenever somebody leaves this population and goes elsewhere, there will be a decrease. So over here, natality, immigration contributes to increase in population density. Mortality and emigration contributes to decrease in population density. If you have to represent this in the form of an equation, if you have to find out right now this is the density, after this time period how much will be the density, if you have to find this out, you can use this equation. Nt plus 1 is equal to Nt plus within brackets b plus I minus d plus E. This is the population density. Whether it will increase or decrease depends upon both of these are contributing to its increase, both of these are contributing to its decrease. Add these two. Both of them are contributing to increase. Add these two. Both of them are contributing to decrease. If this sum is greater than this sum, then population density has increased. If mortality and emigration is greater than natality and immigration, then population density will decrease. It depends on these 4 processes. Okay. So at time t plus 1, if you have to find out, this is the formula that you should use. Very simple math, right? Now let's talk about growth models. When you see a population growing with time, the number of individuals will increase in time. As it grows with time, it shows a kind of predictable pattern. Okay, so there are 2 different such types of growths. One is called exponential growth and the other one is called logistic growth. More about it we'll learn in detail. Before I start off with the exponential growth, I'll tell you a little small story that's also mentioned in your NCERT textbook. Apparently in one kingdom somewhere, I don't know, a king challenges one of his, I don't know, probably citizens to play chess with him. And he being overconfident will say, if you win the game, you can ask for whatever you want or something like that. And the very humble other person will say, I don't want much really. Just if I win at all, then give me some wheat grains. And you have to measure the wheat grains such a way that in the first what do you call this, square of the chessboard, there's a total of 64 squares in a chessboard, right? In the first square there'll be 1 wheat grain, in the second there should be 2, in the third there should be the double 4, fourth will be 8, and then it'll be 16 and so on till the 64th square. And the king thinks it's a very silly kind of an ask, and then he agrees, and then unfortunately the king loses in this game and they start counting the wheat grains that have to be given, that has to be given to the other person, the winner. So eventually once they start counting and bringing together grains of rice from everywhere in the kingdom, they realize that it is impossible for them to get to the 64th board because in the 64th square, because that will need 1.8 or 18 into 10 to the power of 18, that many wheat grains. And the king, even if he pulls in all of the wheat that has grown his entire kingdom, will not be able to match that number. So that is how exponential growth is. You don't realize it, but if it keeps doubling, it will increase to a very, very large number. Now, generally in a population, you don't see exponential growth. Exponential growth can be seen only when the resources available are unlimited, but in nature it is rarely ever unlimited. When I say resources limited, I mean we're talking about, just one moment. All right. When I say resources, we're talking about food, space, mate, all of that. So whenever under ideal conditions, all of the resources are, unlimited, available to the organisms in unlimited quantities, then you can see this type of a growth. And if you plot this on a graph, you get a J-shaped curve. Over here, what we are doing is we are taking time on the x-axis and population density on the y-axis. At time 0, there were these many individuals, but with time, their number is increased, and it has exponentially increased, as you can see. That is why you see it is growing constantly, and it has given us like a J-shaped curve. If you have to find out the change in population density represented by dn by dt, the equation that you can use to express this is dn by dt is equal to b minus d, birth rate minus death rate, multiplied with initial population density. Birth rate minus death rate, not number of birth, number of death. Lowercase b minus lowercase d into initial population density. B minus d is represented as lowercase r. Okay, so this r basically whether there is a positive change in the population density or not depends on this r value, right? R is basically birth rate minus death rate. It is called the intrinsic rate of natural increase. Of course, if the birth rate is more than the death rate, R value will be more, and if R value will be more, population density increase also will be very high. Very simple to understand. Now, if you integrate this equation, what we get is Nt is equal to N naught e to the power RT, where Nt is the population density at time t, N naught is the initial population density at time 0, R I've already told you what it is, E is the base of natural logarithms, that you know every time there is exponential, there will be E, right? Exponential growth. That is about your J-shaped curve. So here there is a mention of the R value for different populations. For Norway rat it's 0.015. For human population in India in the year 1981 it was 0.0205. For flower beetle it is 0.12. This may seem like a small number, but here we are not calculating number of individuals born or dead. We are calculating the birth rate. There is a difference between the birth rate and the death rate, right? So the greater the number, greater the value of R, faster will be the growth of that population. That is what R represents or determines. Now let's talk about the second type of growth model, which is called the logistic growth. Here, this is also called Verhulst-Pearl logistic growth. This happens when the resources are limited. Okay, whenever there are limited resources, you can see this kind of growth. What happens here is you're plotting the same graph. At time 0, like initially there were these many individuals, but with time it has shown an increase, but that increase does not happen indefinitely. At one point it will slow down and become steady. Now whenever whenever the resources in a population are limited, you cannot expect indefinite exponential growth to take place. If a habitat has limited resources, then it can support only a fixed number of individuals in a population. For example, if you have a 2 BHK, you can only comfortably support like 4 people, comfortably they can live with their own privacy and everything. But if you have to accommodate more people, probably you can accommodate like 30, 40 people, but you can't accommodate 150 people in a 2 BHK, right? So 2 BHK has its limit. Okay, the space, if you consider as a resource, is limited there. Whenever resources are limited, unlimitedly, indefinitely, population size cannot increase. I'm giving you example of space, but it could be food also. In a habitat, if resources are limited, there is only a specific number of individuals that habitat can support. The maximum number of individuals that a habitat can support is called its carrying capacity. It's represented by capital letter K. Okay, so this is the population density. Once it reaches this carrying capacity, this is K. This is the highest number of individuals that a population can support. It cannot grow beyond this. So what happens here is, initially, if you look at the sigmoid curve or S-shaped curve, you can see there are 3 distinct regions. You have an initial lag phase where growth is happening, but it's not very rapid, very slow growth is happening. They are getting adapted to the new environment and everything. And after a period of time, it will show exponential growth, like it will increase, double, and show exponential growth. As it reaches the carrying capacity, you can see an asymptote, which is, it is going very closely, almost parallelly to K, but it never touches that line. It will never reach the carrying capacity. Now this can be represented with this equation. dN by dt, change in population density, is given by Rn multiplied by, over here population density also, carrying capacity also comes, K minus N divided by K. This is the equation. You know what K is, you know what N is, you know what R is, you know everything here, right? Yeah. In NCERT, they've given both the graphs together. Okay, so this is the carrying capacity beyond which this S-shaped curve will not grow. Since exponential growth happens where there are unlimited resources, there is no carrying capacity coming into picture there. But in nature, indefinitely, unlimited resources cannot be present. For a brief period of time, maybe, but indefinitely, it will not be present. Sooner or later, one or the other resource will become limiting. If there is sufficient space, then food could become limiting. If there is sufficient food and space, then mate could become limiting. If they don't find a mate, they cannot reproduce, and the population density cannot keep increasing at the same pace, right? So one or the other thing will become limiting. So if you compare the two, more realistic one is the logistic growth, not the exponential growth, okay? Because in nature, such ideal conditions rarely ever exist, right? So that's about population growth. Now let's talk about life history variations. Life history variation. So I've told you even in the beginning of this lecture that as living organisms, we all have a biological purpose. That is to ensure that our species continues. We reproduce and make sure that even after we die and we're gone, our species continue to live on this planet. Every organism wants to maximize their reproductive fitness. Okay. So what they do is, over the course of evolution, each organism would be exposed to varying set of selection pressures. Depending upon what was the kind of environment a particular organism faced while it was evolving, it would have adapted certain strategies to maximize its reproductive fitness. So under a particular set of selection pressures, organisms evolve towards the most efficient reproductive strategies. For example, if you consider how frequently an organism reproduces in a lifetime, there are some organisms which reproduce only once in their entire lifetime. For example, bamboos, bamboo plants, salmon fish. There are organisms that reproduce multiple times in their lifetime, like many mammals and birds. So, which is better? You can't really say that. For bamboo, reproducing once is better, so it has stuck to it. During the course of evolution, it would have tried and tested different strategies, and what works best for it, it would have stuck to it. So, reproducing once in a year is beneficial for bamboo, so it does that. It has evolved that way. The selection pressures that birds and mammals probably faced was different, so they have evolved to reproduce multiple times in their lifetime. If you can consider how many offsprings and the size of the offspring that are produced, there's difference in that also. There are many organisms like many fishes and invertebrates, they reproduce in large quantities, they produce a lot of offspring. And those offspring will all be very, very small in size, and there's not much parental care there. They lay their eggs probably, and then some of them of course care for their young ones, but a lot of them don't really care for their young ones. They reproduce, they produce a lot of offspring which are very small in size with little or no parental care. Whereas if you consider mammals and birds, you see that we lay or we produce offspring lesser in number, not in hundreds and thousands, fewer in number, but they are larger in size, and there is some amount of parental care. If you see dogs and cats and other mammals, the number of offspring is high compared to humans, but it's very less compared to fishes and frogs. There, the number of eggs that they produce only will be in hundreds and thousands. So here, relatively less, probably per pregnancy, dogs and cats might produce 6-5 pups and kittens, but they care for them. Mothers have mammary glands to feed them. Even birds, they incubate the egg. After the egg hatches, till the bird learns to fly and fend for itself, it will go get food and feed it to the bird. All of that happens in some organisms. Again, why is it that way? Because over the course of evolution, different organisms have faced different selection pressures, and they have evolved accordingly to whatever suits them best. All right. So that is what is called life history variation. Now we have to talk about population interactions. At the beginning of the chapter, I told you how we will learn about how organisms interact with each other, and also about how living organisms interact with its physical environment. We've spoken enough about our interaction with the abiotic factors, but now we'll focus on how living organisms interact among themselves. So there are various kinds of interactions that happen between populations belonging to two different species. Right now, we are focusing on interactions of two different populations belonging to two different species, interspecific population interactions. Now, there are certain interactions where both the interacting species benefit. There are certain interactions where one benefits, one is neither benefited nor harmed. There are interactions where one is benefited, one is harmed. There are interactions where one is negatively, it is negatively affected and the other one is neutral. So you have various different types of population interactions depending upon how it has affected the two interacting species or interacting populations. Here's a list of them. In all these population interactions, you can see how there are two species involved, species A and species B. The first one is mutualism. Over here we're using symbols. Plus sign indicates it's benefiting, minus, negative, detrimental, neither benefit nor harm is represented as 0. The first type of population interaction is mutualism. In mutualistic relationship, both the organisms or both the species involved will be benefited. In commensalism, one species is benefited, the other one is neither benefited nor harmed. Predation and parasitism are positive negative interactions where one species is benefited, the other species is harmed. Competition, both the species are negatively affected. It's detrimental for both the interacting species. Finally, we have commensalism where it's negative for one species and neutral for the other. So we have to learn in detail about all of these population interactions. We learn about, okay, what is happening here? 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 5 in detail. This is not explained in detail in your syllabus. Let's start off with predation. Predation, the moment I say predation, you probably thought of a tiger chasing a deer or a lion chasing a bison and hunting it, killing it and then feeding on it, right? That's the general understanding of predation. But ecologically, even herbivorous organisms feeding on plants is considered as predation itself. We are killing the plant and eating it, right? So ecologically, that is also considered predation. Predation is very, very important, a very, very significant type of interaction in nature because through predation, energy gets transferred from one trophic level to the other. So predation is nature's way of transferring energy across different trophic levels. Alright, here are examples of a carnivore feeding on another animal and a herbivorous sparrow feeding on some nuts. Now, talking about significance of predation, there are three very important points you should remember. Firstly, I already told you. It acts as conduit for energy transfer. Through predation, energy from one trophic level gets transferred to another trophic level. Now, plant has some biomolecule, some biomass present in it. If I feed on it, that energy in the plant will get transferred to me. If a deer hunts and feeds, if a lion hunts and feeds on a bison, the biomass in that bison, the energy present in that bison will be transferred to the tiger or lion. So, because of predation, energy transfer is happening across different trophic levels. Conduit means it's acting like a channel for the transfer of energy to happen across trophic levels. Secondly, because of predation, prey population is kept under control. If predator is not there, if a lion or a tiger is not there in a forest, the herbivore population will increase dramatically. If they start overgrazing, then the plant population will come down. If in nature stability has to be maintained, all of these animals, all of these population size has to be kept under check. So these predators do the job of keeping the prey population in check. Because they feed on this prey population, their numbers are kept checked. Okay? Without predators, prey species could achieve very high population densities and cause instability in the ecosystem. I'll give you an example as we move on. Also, there are certain exotic species. Okay, I'll give you the example for this. Exotic species are species that are not naturally found in a habitat. Like for example, Parthenium was not naturally found in India earlier. It was, it was introduced to India as a contaminant, as a weed along with wheat. When we were importing wheat from USA, that is when, as a weed, it got introduced into India. Okay, so that is an exotic species. It's not naturally found here. Species that are naturally found in a geographical area are called native species or indigenous species. If it was not initially here, but it has moved or has been introduced either deliberately or by mistake, then you call it exotic species or alien species. Sometimes when alien species are introduced to a new geographical area for whatever reason, because they lack natural predators in that area, they will grow dramatically, increase in number, and even pose a threat for the native species to grow. Okay, so that also has been observed because there are no natural predators for it. I'll give you an example for that. There is a plant called the prickly pear cactus that is found in the US. This prickly pear cactus was introduced into Australia. Okay, so in the early 1920s. Now, this is a plant. The predator for a plant will be a herbivorous organism. You know how insects feed on plant parts while they are in their caterpillar stage, and then they eat a lot, and then they form a cocoon, and then they transform and become the adult insect and all of that, right? There is one species of moth called Cactoblastis cactorum. So this species of moths, caterpillar, feeds on this plant. Okay. So the natural predator for this plant was this moth's caterpillar. But once it was introduced into Australia, that moth isn't there. So this doesn't have a natural predator. It grew so rapidly because there is no predator that it occupied hectares of range land that was present and was used for cows and other cattle to feed. It occupied so much area, it occupied some agricultural fields as well, and people had to spend more money to get rid of it than the money that they would get from their agricultural produce. So people just let it be. And after almost 10 years and after a lot of research, people went to USA, captured these moths, and then they brought it via water, like through ships to Australia, and let it in these fields, and then eventually over a period of time their numbers were controlled. Initially, I'm not sure if you can see this very clearly, but this is before the moth caterpillars were introduced in this area. You can see how there's a lot of cactus plants spread out. And after a couple of years later, it's the same spot. You can see how everything has been cleared. In the absence of predator, such a thing could happen. The third thing is, predators maintain species diversity in an ecosystem. I'll give you an example for this. There is an experiment that people performed in the rocky intertidal communities of the American Pacific coast. Over there is a starfish called the pisaster. Okay, pisaster. This starfish feeds on small invertebrates like mollusks and other invertebrates. There were many different species of invertebrates present in that area. In the area where they performed this experiment, they experimentally wantedly removed this predator. This predator feeds on invertebrates, okay. This predator was removed. The prey species is invertebrate. Many different species of predators, prey species was there. Because this predator was removed, the competition for space and food increased among the invertebrate species. Because of an increase in competition, many species went extinct within a year after this pisaster was removed. More than 10 species getting extinct just within 1 year because of this experiment. This just shows how important a role of predator is in an ecosystem. If the predator is not there, the prey species could go extinct because of increased competition. Because of this predator's presence, there were more species present. Let's say for as long as pisaster was there were 30 different species of invertebrates. They were able to coexist because this predator is keeping all of those prey population in check. Once this was experimentally removed from that area, there was no predator for them. Among them, competition increased and 10 of them went extinct because of competition. Now the diversity has decreased. Initially there were 30 different types, variety was more, diversity was more. Right now 10 of them or more than 10 of them have gone extinct. So we have less than 20 present. That shows how species diversity itself could reduce in the absence of a predator in an ecosystem. Now, though predators kill other organisms, hunt and feed on them, they are very, very careful. They are prudent, which means they don't hunt like to kill their boredom. They don't hunt because they are feeling sad or anything. Unless they are hungry, unless they need to eat, they will not hunt, because they also know if they over hunt and over exploit the prey population, there could come a time when they don't have enough food at all. Eventually the prey population could go extinct, and as a result, without food, the predator population also could go extinct. They are aware of that. They are smart animals, right? Smart organisms. So in order to make sure that there is continuation of species, they are very careful and prudent and calculative. They don't over exploit their prey at all. Okay. Now, alright, predator is known to hunt and kill the prey and feed on it and all of that. But prey population also would have evolved certain mechanisms to make sure that the predator cannot easily detect them. There are three important points you must remember here. Either the prey population or the prey organism will mimic the surrounding environment by mimicry or camouflage, which we also call cryptic coloration. It can fail or it can reduce the chances of being detected by the predator. Let's take this frog for example. You can see that a lot in frogs and insects. There is a frog sitting right here on this tree bark. I want you to notice how the color and texture of this frog resembles so closely with the bark. If a snake or some small reptile that is passing over here, unless the frog moves, will not even realize that there's a frog sitting there. That is called camouflage or cryptic coloration. Over here, right on top of this leaf, you can see another small leaf-like thing, which is actually a leaf insect. It has legs here, right? So you can see how it resembles the leaf in color in these patterns and markings, and it has even vein-like markings on it. So any bird or any other reptile which could potentially feed on this will not even notice this insect, right? So that way it will reduce its chances of being detected by the predator. Secondly, what it could do is, it could be poisonous. If it is poisonous and releases certain toxins, then the animals will realize that if you consume this, you will fall sick and you could die. So they will avoid feeding on such animals. Okay, it could be poisonous also. There is a poison dart frog that you can find, I think, in the Western Ghats or in the Amazon rainforest. I'm not very sure. If you feed on that, that person could even die. Okay, so it's that poisonous. Then, thirdly, it could even be distasteful. It can, get a bad taste that the predator will not prefer, so that it, avoids eating that particular animal. Example for this is the monarch butterfly. You know how insects, they have different developmental stages in their life. There is an egg, larva, pupa and everything. During the larval stages, insects are known to feed a lot. The monarch butterfly caterpillar feeds on a poisonous weed during its caterpillar stage. Okay. So, some chemicals, certain toxins in that plant will get accumulated in its body, and that will remain even in the adult monarch butterfly, and that is what will give it like a terrible taste. Okay, so because of its bad taste, birds and other predators will not prefer to feed on this particular insect. All about that I've already mentioned here. Next, we spoke about how animals have evolved and come up with defenses to prevent being detected by its predators. But plants, they can't even run away from herbivores because they don't have legs, they can't move around, they are fixed to one place. And for plants, I've already mentioned, herbivores itself are equivalent to predators. And roughly around 25% of insects are phytophagous. They depend on plant for food. But plants cannot run away from their predators. What have they done? They have come up with morphological as well as chemical defenses to prevent being fed on. Morphological defenses. In acacia cactus, you can see spines and thorns formed. Because there are spines and thorns, animals will not prefer to feed on it. Chemical defenses, producing chemicals that are toxic and can disrupt the functioning or reproduction of the predator. This Calotropis plant produces poisonous chemicals called cardiac glycosides. This is the Calotropis plant. It's called 𝐒𝐻𝐿 in Kannada. I don't know what it's called in other languages. So you don't see any herbivore browsing this plant or feeding on this. That's because this produces this chemical called cardiac glycosides, which can affect the functioning and health of whoever consumes that. So animals have realized that over time and they avoid feeding on this. Okay. Next, we know many other plants from which we extract certain chemicals for commercial use. For example, nicotine from tobacco plant, caffeine from coffee, quinine, strychnine, opium. All of these we extract for our own use. But why plants actually produce these chemicals and different alkaloids is because to protect themselves from herbivory. They can't run away. So they produce these chemicals that alter the physiology of whoever consumes it. And as a result, they hope that may the animal not come and feed on me. Alright, so that's about predation. Now let's talk about competition. The most popular definition for competition is that it occurs whenever closely related species compete for the same resource which is limited. When two closely related species are competing for the same resource which is limiting, then that is competition. That is the most popular idea of competition. But it's not really true, because sometimes competition is seen even when they are not closely related. Even when the resource is unlimited, even then you see competition. For example, take the example of flamingos and fishes in a pond or a lake. Okay. Here, flamingos are birds, they visit the lake for food, they feed on the zooplanktons present in the water. Fishes which reside in the lake itself, resident fishes, they also feed on the zooplankton present in the lake or pond or whichever water body. Now, is a fish and a bird closely related? If you say yes, they are animals, in that way even I am related to a bacterium. Every organism is related to another organism. But over here, of course, they are related because they are animals, but they are not like closely related. If two species are competing, they are closely related. If a bird and another bird is competing, that is close relation. Here, a fish is competing with a bird for the same resource. They are not closely related. Still, you are seeing competition, right? Competition can happen even when they are not closely related. Secondly, even when resources are not limiting, then also competition can happen. I'll give you an example. It's called interference competition. What basically happens in interference competition is, I'll give you the example of lions and hyenas. Lions and hyenas both are carnivorous animals that feed on herbivores like deer and bisons and other herbivorous animals. Okay. Now both of them feed on the same kind of food, so they are competing for the same resource. Even though the resource may not be limiting, sometimes the presence of a lion alone kind of intimidates the hyena. Let's say there's a group of hyenas there, there's a pride of lions here on this side, and there's a lot of cattle browsing or grazing there. If these hyenas see that there is a pride of lions, a group of lions there, they are scared of these lions because of being intimidated by the lions. Even though there is food, they are not going towards it. Even when there is unlimited resource, there is competition between these two. All right, so that is interference competition. Even when the resources like food and space are abundant, still the efficiency of one species, in this case the hyena species, might be reduced due to the interfering and inhibitory presence of the other species. Okay? Yeah. Now, how do you define competition in that case? Whenever, in the presence of another species, if the reproductive fitness of one species is compromised, then you call it competition. A process in which fitness means not like physical fitness, I'm talking about reproductive fitness here, which is lowercase r, birth rate minus death rate, that r. If the reproductive fitness of one species is reduced in the presence of another species, then you call it competition. Let's take this example. If not for this lions, these would have abundant access, there would be no interference competition, and they could eat, feed, grow well and increase in number. The presence of lion is reducing the reproductive fitness of hyenas. Even though the lion is competitively superior, it is having to share food with hyenas. The presence of hyenas to an extent will affect and reduce the reproductive fitness of lion also, because they are sharing the same resource, right? So whenever in the presence of another organism, your reproductive fitness is reduced, you call that competition. All right? It need not be for a limited resource. It need not be between closely related species. It could be two very distantly related species, or it could be even when the resources are not limited. Okay? So that's the definition for competition. I'll give you an example for competition. There are giant tortoises. There were giant tortoises that roamed the Galapagos Islands. Huge tortoises. You know how tortoises are like really slow, and they are herbivorous. They used to feed on grass and little plants. In the islands where these were found, goats were introduced by certain travelers. These goats are also herbivorous. Now the goats and these tortoises both are competing for the same resource, which is plants, grasses. Now compared to these two, this is very slow. It cannot reach taller plants. That is a concern. Compared to this, the browsing efficiency of goats is higher, right? Competitively, they are superior. Of course, they are competing for the same resource, but they are better at fetching food compared to this because of their pace, because of their height, right? Now, just few years after those goats were introduced into this island, because of their competitive superiority and greater browsing efficiency, these giant tortoises went extinct from this island. Okay, so the abundant tortoises in Galapagos became extinct within a decade after the goats were introduced due to the greater browsing efficiency of the goats. So here we can see how, because of extreme competition, some species itself can go extinct. there is a concept called competitive release, which we will try to understand. Now, let's say there's one area. In this area, there are two species present. Okay, I will represent that in two different colors. One is this blue color and the other one, let's use yellow color for a stark contrast. This is present like this. Okay. Now, over here, the yellow one is competitively superior. The blue one is competitively inferior. Whenever the competitively superior species is experimentally removed, naturally, if you allow it to live there, it will survive. Okay. This will only occupy the most area because it's competitively superior. Experimentally, I am only forcibly removing this from that area. Whenever the competitively superior species is experimentally removed from a geographical area, you can see how the competitively inferior species increases its area dramatically. What was initially confined to just a small portion because of the presence of this competitively superior species, if you allow it in nature, eventually this could take over or its numbers will go high, this number will come down. But just experimentally to see the effect of competition, if you remove the superior species, you can see how the competitively inferior species will spread out more and expand its distributional range dramatically. Alright? Now, there's another concept, an example for competitive release you can see in Cornell's elegant field experiments that he conducted in the rocky sea coasts of Scotland. Over here, he was studying the competition between two species of barnacles. One is called Balanus, the other one is 𝐾𝐇. Balanus is smaller in size. Balanus is larger in size and is competitively superior. 𝐾𝐇 is smaller in size and competitively inferior. Okay. So what he noticed was that in the rocky intertidal areas of Scotland, wherever Balanus grew or was present, over here you can see the larger orange one is Balanus, the smaller grey one is 𝐾𝐇. Okay, so over here both Balanus and 𝐾𝐇 could grow, but because Balanus is competitively superior, it wouldn't allow 𝐾𝐇 to grow. When he experimentally removed Balanus from here, 𝐾𝐇 was found to grow even over there also. Okay, but that part of the experiment is not given in NCERT textbook. In NCERT, they've told that on the rocky sea coasts of Scotland, larger and competitively superior barnacle Balanus dominates the intertidal area and excludes the smaller barnacle 𝐾𝐇. But they've not explained that experimentally if you remove Balanus, 𝐾𝐇 also will grow. Okay, that is what he actually did, Cornell, but that experiment is not completely given in your NCERT textbook. Okay, so when we talk about competition, generally it is herbivores and plants that are more adversely affected compared to the carnivores. Okay. Now, there's something called competitive exclusion principle. It was proposed by a person called Gauss, so we call it Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. What he says is, whenever two closely related species are competing for the same resource, closely related species competing for the same resource, they can compete for a period of time, but they cannot indefinitely compete for the same resource and coexist. Eventually, with time, sooner or later, probably after a couple of years, the competitively superior one will eliminate the competitively inferior one. This is what he said. When two closely related species are competing for the same resource, then they cannot coexist indefinitely. Competitively superior one will eliminate or exclude the competitively inferior one. Okay, but this isn't always true. It may be true in some cases when the resources are extremely limited, but otherwise it's not really true. Because in recent studies, we have found out that whenever two closely related species are competing for the same resource, they will evolve so many different mechanisms to coexist instead of excluding each other. One very good example for that is a mechanism called resource partitioning. For this, we can take the example of MacArthur's birds. Okay, so MacArthur is a person who showed us that 5 closely related species of a type of bird called warblers could coexist on the same kind of trees despite having to share for the common resource. Okay, how did they manage to stay together and coexist despite despite being dependent on the same resource? We'll understand. That is because of behavioral differences in their foraging activities. I'll tell you what exactly happened. Here you can see all the 5 different types of warblers that MacArthur talked about. You can see how they all lived on the same kind of trees. I want you to notice how each bird has occupied a different part of the same tree. This probably prefers to live on the top, this prefers to live in the middle, that one lives in the middle in a different zone, the last one lives at the bottom. You can see there is some overlap also, like this and this kind of overlaps, this and this kind of overlaps. In that case, what happens? The feeding time, they will vary. If one feeds during the day, the other one will feed at night. Whatever resource is available, they will partition that, they will share that and still coexist. If one feeds on insects, the other one will feed on seeds. So like that, whatever resource is available, they will utilize that and still manage to coexist. Okay, so competitive exclusion principle isn't true all the time. It may be true sometimes when the resources are limiting, but even if the resources are limiting, organisms come up with ways and evolve mechanisms to make sure that they all coexist. Okay? Now let's talk about parasitism. Parasitism is oh wait, I forgot to mention how predation, we started off with predation, right? Predation is a positive negative interaction where the predator is benefited because it's getting food, because the prey is getting killed, it is harmed. Okay, talking about competition, since both of them are competing for the same resource, both of them will be negatively affected. It's a negative type of interaction. Now talking about parasitism, this is also a positive negative interaction where the parasite is getting food, nourishment and probably shelter, whereas the host is not benefited, it is harmed. Okay, so there are a lot of parasites that have evolved to be host specific, and as and when the host evolves, the parasite also simultaneously evolves. We call this coevolution. In accordance with their lifestyles, parasites have evolved many special adaptations. For example, tapeworm is a parasite for humans. It lives in the human gut. This tapeworm lives in darkness because inside the gut there is no light. What is the point of having eyes when there is complete darkness? There is no need to spend energy to produce eyes, right? To develop eyes. So whatever sense organs are unnecessary, it will not have it. So it will lose the unnecessary sense organs. For a parasite to cling on to the host, they need certain adhesive structures, and also to suck and derive nutrition from the host, they need sucker kind of organs. So these parasites would have evolved and developed adhesive organs to stick on to the host, and also suckers to, derive nutrition from the host. Thirdly, some of them will lose their digestive system because, for example, if you consider the tapeworm which is living in your intestine you have completely digested food. You would have put in the effort to break down food and digest it, and this worm will get ready-made digested food. What is the point of it spending energy in having an own digestive system while it's getting digested food readily available to it? So it's a waste of energy. It does not have digestive system. Then their reproductive capacity generally will be very, very high. Okay, so generally the life cycles of these parasites will be very complex. They will have more than one intermediate hosts, and vectors also will be required to parasitize the primary host. I'll give you the example of human liver fluke. It is a parasite flatworm. Apart from human, it will have two other intermediate hosts, one snail and one fish. Only then it will be able to complete its life cycle. And everybody knows about the malarial parasite Plasmodium. You've learnt about it in detail in the chapter Human Health and Diseases. So this malarial parasite also needs a vector in the form of a mosquito to transmit the, for transmission to occur, right? So these are some examples. So most of the parasites will harm the host because it's deriving nourishment from it. And they may even reduce the survival, growth and reproduction of the host. Okay. When a host is infested with a parasite, they become very weak. Because they become very weak, they are more vulnerable to predation now. Consider a group of deer. So one of them is parasitized by some infestation. Some infestation has happened. Some parasite is causing a disease in one deer. It will become so weak it can't run fast enough. So if a predator is chasing that herd of deer, this being weak will be more vulnerable for predation, right? Parasitism makes that organism weak and it will make the host more vulnerable to predation by making it weak physically. Parasites are of two types, ectoparasite and endoparasite. Ecto means outside, endo means inside. Ectoparasites are parasites that live outside the host's body. Endoparasites live within the host body. Can you think of some examples for ectoparasites? The lice in our head, ticks and mites in dogs, and on marine fish you have a type of parasite called copepods, and Cuscuta is a parasitic plant that will parasitize hedge plants. It will have specialized roots that can penetrate till the phloem and obtain food from them, from there. So these are ectoparasites. Liver fluke, Plasmodium, all of these are endoparasites. They live inside the body of the host, and generally endoparasites will have a complex life cycle due to extreme specialization. Last type is called brood parasitism. This is something all of you must have heard at some point in your life. You know that a quail never builds its eggs. Builds its nests, right? So quail bird is basically your cuckoo bird. This one will look very similar to crows in appearance, and its eggs also have evolved in such a way that they also resemble the eggs of the crow. Quail is just one example. There are many such parasitic birds which show brood parasitism. So what they do is when the crow is not around, it'll go check and lay its eggs in the crow's nest. The crow is poor in math. It does not know how many eggs it had laid. It will think that the cuckoo bird's eggs are also its own eggs. It will incubate it. After the egg hatches and the baby birds come outside, it will fetch food for those birds and come feed it and help it grow and eventually teach it to fly and all of that. Only once it starts making that sound, you will realize that it's not a crow and it's actually another bird, another species, the cuckoo. So over here what happens is during the course of evolution, these parasitic birds have even made sure and evolved that in such a way that its eggs resembles the host bird's eggs in size, in markings, in shape and everything. Over here you can see there are so many eggs. All of them look similar. This is the parasitic bird's eggs. This is the parasitic bird eggs. This is the parasite's bird eggs. Okay, so they will look very similar in appearance. That is the reason why the host bird cannot really differentiate. That is brood parasitism. Now let's talk about commensalism. Commensalism is a positive neutral interaction. One of the species will be benefited, the other one will neither be benefited nor harmed. One example for that is orchids growing on a mango tree's branch. Orchids are not parasites. They're just there for support. They are obtaining support from the mango tree. But because these orchids are there, there is no harm that the mango tree is facing. So for the orchid, it's beneficial. For the mango tree, it's neutral, neither beneficial nor detrimental. Next, we have barnacles growing on the surface of whale. There are so many research articles that says it bothers the whale, but here it is given as an example for commensalism. These barnacles are animals, but they can't move. Okay, so when they become adults, when they develop, they will become attached to a substratum. These guys, they will settle on whales and get attached there. For them to find food, if they are stuck to one place on some rock, getting food might be a difficulty. They themselves cannot move. But the whale moves around. Along with the whale, they will ride like a piggyback. And then they will get more access to food and they can survive better. So this association is beneficial for the barnacles, not so much or no benefit or harm for the whale according to NCERT, but apparently these barnacles disturb the whale and they are seen scratching it on rough surfaces near the shore and all of that, on rocks and all of that. Yeah, so that's one example. And then everybody who's watched Finding Nemo knows that clownfish likes to live among sea anemone, which are also animals. Sea anemone, their sealant traits, they will have these stinging cells, and with the help of those, they will sting other animals that come near the sea anemone. This is protected by those stings. And other bigger fishes will not come here because they are afraid of being stung. So this is safe amidst these sea anemone. So because of the sea anemone, clownfish is getting benefited, but it doesn't really bother the sea anemone or anything. It's neither benefited nor harmed. Finally, we have cattle and egrets. Cattle and egrets, you may have seen these kinds of birds walking around cows and buffaloes. So what basically happens here is, these feed on insects that are usually found in between grasses and near the soil. Going and picking them up by themselves will cost them more energy. So whenever these cows are moving around, these insects tend to come out of the grass. So that is when they catch those insects. It's easier for them to find food when they are around these cattle. So it's beneficial for this little guy. It's neither beneficial nor harmful for the cow or the cattle. They're just going about doing their job. It's just helping out its little friend. Okay. Ultimately, last one, we have mutualism. Mutualism is a positive interaction. Both the interacting species will be benefited. Examples for that you've already learnt: lichens and mycorrhiza. Lichen is a symbiotic association of algae with fungi. It even looks like a single organism. You can't even make out there are two different organisms here, right? Algae being photosynthetic synthesizes food. Fungi being filamentous helps in better absorption of water and nutrients and gives it to the algae. Algae gives fungus the food. Fungus gives algae better absorption and also shelter. Okay, both of them are benefited. Mycorrhiza. Myco means fungus, rhiza means roots. Fungi associated with the roots of higher plants, that is called mycorrhiza. Plants being photosynthetic will synthesize food and pass it on to the fungus. The fungus again helps in better absorption of nutrients and water from the soil because of its filamentous nature. Alright, so both of them are benefited here. What's interesting is mutualism that you see between one species of plant and one species of animal. Generally, plants require the help of animals for pollination and for seed dispersal. To make sure that animals visit the plant for pollinating and dispersing their seeds, plants will offer them many rewards. Okay, about attractants and rewards we've already learned in the chapter sexual reproduction in flowering plants. In order to make sure repeatedly animals come to them for pollination, they will provide pollen grains and nectar as snacks for pollinators. For seed dispersal, they will provide fruits that are delicious and nutritious for animals and birds so that the seeds are dispersed. Okay, that way they go eat the pollen grain, feed on the pollen grain, drink the nectar, bring about pollination. They eat the fruit, in turn help in seed dispersal. Okay. If that happens, then it is mutual. Sometimes you've learned how there are nectar and nectar robbers and pollen robbers. They just, insects just go there and feed on the nectar and pollen and not really bring about pollination. So plants also have to develop mechanisms to ensure that pollination happens all the time. This is a wonderful example of mutualism. There is a species, for every species of fig, pollination is brought about by a specific species of wasp. Okay. This is the fig inflorescence. What you're looking at inside are all flowers. The wasp will lay its eggs only inside this fig inflorescence. The fig inflorescence will provide space for the wasp to lay eggs. In the course of the wasp moving inside to lay eggs and coming out, it will bring about pollination. It will go to another flower, probably it will bring about pollination. As an advantage, as an added benefit, this fig plant will even give some of its seeds for the developing larvae to feed on. Alright, as it's developing. See, the parent insect came, laid its eggs and went outside. By the time the eggs develop into larvae, fertilization would have happened and the ovules would have started to form seeds. When the larvae is formed, the seeds are also formed. Some of the seeds are eaten by the larvae. Okay, so here both are getting benefited. And this is highly species specific. Every species of fig will have its own species of wasp that can pollinate it. Both are dependent on each other for reproduction. If the fig plant goes extinct, the wasp will have nowhere else to lay eggs. It could also go extinct. Because if it doesn't lay eggs, next generation is not coming. If the wasp goes extinct, then the fig also could go extinct because it has no other pollinator. Without pollination, no fertilization. Without no fertilization, no seed formation. Without seed formation, no next generation. So they both dependent on each other for reproduction, right? That is seen in the fig wasp mutualism. Now finally, we have the example of what is called pseudo-copulation. There is a species of orchid, Mediterranean orchid called Ophrys. You know how orchids like to mimic, right? This Ophrys orchids, one of the petals resembles very closely to the female bee of one species, not a honeybee, some other bee of some species, it resembles the female. The males will look at this petal, it has markings and structure and pattern, texture, everything very similar to the female bee of the same species. That guy gets confused and thinks this is the female. It'll end up copulating with the petal. In this process, it'll bring about pollination. Alright, this is also called sexual deceit. Deceiving somebody means you're cheating somebody, right? This is sexual deceit because this poor guy has no idea that it's not the female. His reproduction is not happening, but it has no idea. So this plant, because of its mimicry, has deceived this male insect and tricking it in thinking that it is the female. Okay, so that is the last example for mutualism that we have. I hope all of you have understood every concept that was taught, and it was a lengthy session. I'm tired talking, you must be tired listening to me. I'll see you again next week with another chapter which is not so big, very simple, easy, chill chapter. Until then, take care of yourselves. Study really hard. Time that we have on the clock is really less right now. Make the best use of whatever time you have. All the very best. Thank you.